The battle for the mind of North America will be fought in the video arena.
We're going to get it over the line, but it's up to us. Thank you.
That he would have, or she would have, $68,000 to $70,000 of that $78,000 for actual purchasing power. What do you think about that?
Again, my name's Todd Beasley. I'm going to be the host. I'm going to be the moderator today. And, I laugh. I have people, I recently went on an around the world journey and I run into old friends and they say, "How you doing, Bees?" And I laugh with them and I say, "Well, I'm old, gray, and I'm round, but I'm still above ground, by golly." So that's a good thing. Yeah. But because of the age that I've got, I'm 62 years old, my political memories, quite frankly, go back to 1967 through 1969. I remember when Pierre Trudeau was running. I remember when he was elected. I remember when Peter Lougheed was running for Alberta against the Socreds, and I remember when he won. I remember as many of us in this room do, the horrific Eastern versus Western challenges that we all lived with. I remember waking up and always hearing that, well, we're in a democracy, only to find out that election after election, before our votes were even counted, before the electoral votes west of Manitoba were counted, the elections were already decided. And policies that affect us are formulated in locations like 905 Toronto, which is 2,000 miles from Alberta. We have nothing in common with those people. And what they're doing is they've created policies that cause great, great harm, and they've been doing it for generations. I remember the National Energy Program. We all do. Danny's going to talk to you about some of the federal very significant issues against our agricultural industry with the Wheat Board, and I look forward to hearing some of those discussions. This gift that we've been given, as I say, this is Danielle Smith's riding. So it's not only she's the MLA for this community, but she's also the Premier. And without question, many of you and many people that aren't in this room have questions that deserve expert answers. And I'm absolutely delighted to be able to introduce the panel here today. We have some exceptional speakers, which are some of the most passionate Albertans that I've had the opportunity to meet. I consider every one of them friends, and I consider every one of them to be experts in their particular field. On the far left, we've got Dr. Dennis Modry. Dr. Modry is one of the chair and the founders of the Alberta Prosperity Project. They're really taking the lead here in the province in terms of gathering intentions for signatures. And Dr. Modry, who is a surgeon, a cardiovascular specialist, he literally gave up his medical practice to lead the independence discussion from an education perspective. He's had hundreds of speaking engagements throughout the province. So please welcome Dr. Modry. We have Mr. Vince Byfield off to my right, and Vince is an absolutely passionate Albertan. He holds the legacy of the Byfield family, both Link and Ted, and I tell you, we're honored, Vince, to have you here today, and thank you very, very much for that. We have Mr. Michael Wagner, a PhD, Dr. Michael Wagner is what we should say. He's an author, he's a columnist with the Western Standard, and he's about as passionate on this discussion as you can imagine, and he's going to have some great answers to some of the questions that invariably you folks might have. We've got Mr. Cory Morgan, who's with us today. Mr. Morgan is an author, he's a journalist, he's also with the Western Standard, and I'm delighted that he's been able to join us. At the very far end of the table is my friend Danny Hozack. Danny and I have hosted a number of political events down through the years. He's the past chair of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, the Wild Rose Party, which we all loved, and unfortunately is no longer there. Danny was part of the Ag Task Force, and he was one of the key policy makers. So this is your panel today. Please give a warm welcome to the team. I want to say this, that this coming vote that we're going to have, we must put the winning conditions in place. When I talk about people deserve expert answers for the questions that they have, it's not a case of perhaps going to a website and maybe saying, well, what about First Nations, or what about our pension plan, or what about our debt obligations, what about this, what about that? Every one of those questions deserve an expert answer. I followed the Scottish independent run here a number of years back, and I thought they were so credible in what they did. They literally created a white paper. It was a written document that was delivered to every mailbox in Scotland, so when people get up in the morning and they want to have their cup of coffee and they want to go, I want to research this topic and I want to have an understanding of what this might mean. And they literally have that document on their mailbox. And I believe as a movement, that's something that we need to begin to focus on, is the creation of that document well in advance of ultimately a vote. We absolutely want the winning conditions to be put in place. And I say that again, that we must think and we must absolutely act strategically if we're going to be successful. This is about our children and grandchildren. I could go on and on and on and on about the oppression that the West has seen since the very beginning, when Canada was formed. In today's National Post, It couldn't have been more perfect timing. Pick up the paper and read the story of Sir John A. Macdonald when Canada was formed and what he put in place. Alberta, Saskatchewan didn't exist at that point in time, but fundamentally, he said, as a part of a foundational condition of the creation of Canada, that the West was ultimately going to serve the East.
Shame.
And it has been that way forever. We have to ask ourselves, are we prepared to continue to leave that political legacy for our children and grandchildren? You know, let's talk about things. Oppressive policy simply as Bill C-69. Any investment that people want to make in our oil and gas industries or our major industries that supports our communities, that supports our families, that supports our tax base. What does the East do? They form complex draconian barriers which creates uncertainty and it kills investment. It's been projected that there's been $100 billion of investment lost in our part of the world as directly as a result of policies that we have zero influence over. Let's talk about Bill C-48, how they are closing down the ability to ship our hydrocarbon to world markets by banning tanker traffic on the west coast of British Columbia, which is a direct attack to our way of life. The net zero legislation, which Carney appears to be continuing to focus on, that is a direct arrow in the heart of our ability to compete and our ability to prosper. Folks, this has been going on for generations. As I said earlier, I remember the National Energy Program. I get a kick out of some of the young folks in the United Conservative Party that I'm a UCP supporter. I want to make that clear, and I support Danielle. But I get a kick out of some of the press releases that they've put out, how, this has been going on for 10 years, the damage that Justin Trudeau has done. God, look, Pop, this has been going on for generations. This has been going on since the 1960s. If we could go back and talk to our grandparents and great-grandparents, they'd say it's been going on since the 20s and 30s. Literally, from the beginning of our nation, this imbalance of political power in our country has led us to this. Above all of that, which I find the most repulsive, is all of them engage in divisive East versus West politics. I never will forget nor forgive Gene Cretin, and I'm saying it the only way that I can. I can't spell it any other way. On the campaign trail, in his best Pepe Le Pew voice, "I prefer not to deal with them there people, eh?" Referring to the West. And he got elected on that. It's been one thing after another where Eastern politicians will say one thing in the West, they say something entirely different in the East, and it always undermines our way of life. It always undermines our opportunities. And I say simply, for the sake of our children and grandchildren, enough's enough. Let's talk about equalization. We have put $600 billion into equalization over the last 15, 20 years. This is the hypocrisy of Quebec, and I reserve my particular disdain for Quebec society, or the leech of confederation as they're referred, or as Maclean magazine calls them, the most corrupt province in the country. Are you aware during Peter Lougheed's days, they had a tough time financing their hydro? Peter Lougheed, in a very magnanimous nation-building approach, he helped fund through the Alberta Hydrocarbon in our Heritage Fund, he helped fund Quebec Hydro. And what does Quebec do? They throw it back in our face by using their political influence in Parliament to take the hydro economic benefit to the Quebec people completely off the formula for equalization. What do? They directly campaign against Western interest. There's going to be no pipeline across our land, eh? They put creatures like Guilbeault in place who just does nothing but be gleeful in terms of policies that go directly to the stake and the opportunities that we might have in our country and in the West. But moreover, the East continuously elects bad government. We had arguably the best prime minister this country has ever seen in Stephen Harper. We were the envy of the world. At the 2008 economic meltdown, Canada led the world and the best economic opportunities we possibly could have. And at the end of the day, what does the East do? They elect a substitute drama teacher for no other reason than he had good hair and he promised to legalize weed. That was it. That was the only reason. And at the end of the day, we finally, after 10 years of hell, what do? They re-elect Trudeau 2.0 and a prime minister that elects and puts the same damn cabinet ministers in place. And somehow the East think this is okay? It isn't. I want to say this. My separation, my Alberta independence discussion is not just Alberta. I believe that all it's going to take for us is to move forward and get momentum, and Saskatchewan is coming with us. Absolutely. That's one for Saskatchewan. There are brothers and sisters. If Saskatchewan comes, Manitoba's coming. They never wanted to be part of this in the first place. The only reason Manitoba was in Confederation was because they sent in the army against Louis Riel. There's a high likelihood that Northern British Columbia is going to come with us in the north. We would instantly become one of the wealthiest per capita jurisdictions on the planet. Our economic opportunities for our children and grandchildren, we're talking Norway wealth. Folks, I made up my mind. I didn't want to be a separatist, but after a lifetime of this confederational dysfunction, I see no way out. There is no fixing this. Anybody that says that we're going to fix all of this, they'll come to the table and they'll act reasonable, not true. I have to say this, as we leave and we begin to build this momentum, nefarious voices are going to be working against us. The CBC is not our friend. They ultimately will spew their propaganda like they always have. They're bought and paid for. Thanks Justin and his $600 million. There is those in our society who are very, very comfortable. Arlene Dickinson is one with $100 million or $200 million. She's not fighting for her pension. She's not worrying about where food's going to come from. She's not going to worry about economic opportunity for her children and grandchildren. So it's easy for them to stand up and say, oh, you can't do this or you can't do that. I look at Jason Kenney and I'm horrified by his voice. We all know what we got out of him. He just proved himself to be a smooth talking, say anything BS artist. And at the end of the day, we expect these things. When you stick your head above the water, there's going to be those that want to push you back down underneath the water. And when they do that, you got to ask their motivation. I believe as a society, we need to put that aside. That is not what we need to listen. We need to create a white paper so that everybody has a written document. This is what this means. So that when you go to the voting booth for the day that referendum happens, whatever you decide from an informed perspective. And I know where I stand. That was a little longer than what I meant, so forgive me. You can see I'm about as passionate with this as I can possibly be. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to welcome Dr. Dennis Modry to the podium. As I say, Dr. Modry is the chair of the Alberta Prosperity Project. Please give Dennis a welcome hand, and Dennis, welcome to the stage.
Well, thanks, Todd, and thank you, everybody, for coming out this afternoon on this long weekend. Just one correction, Todd, I didn't actually give up my practice to do this. I retired after 32 years of cardiac surgery. It's interesting. I just digress before I even start. I thought it during my practice as a cardiac surgeon, as a transplant surgeon, I could help one person at a time. In this role, I feel as though there's the opportunity to help millions. And that is my motivation. Now, before I begin, I know this is going to seem a little bit awkward, so bear with me, but I want to pay tribute to our former Prime Minister and the people that elected him. In the immortal words of Mahatma Gandhi. Now, Mahatma Gandhi, as you know, was a a brilliant lawyer. He was an anti-colonial nationalist. And he was a champion of civil rights and freedom around the world, and he led the independence movement in India. And here's the quote: "If an idiot is in power, then those who put him there are well represented." Now, having said that, it's crystal clear that the people in Saskatchewan, Alberta, central and northern BC didn't put Mr. Trudeau in power. And neither did the people in those areas put our current Prime Minister in power, who without question is far more dangerous than our former PM, mainly because he's very much more intelligent. He's very articulate and he's very persuasive. But what is of great concern to many of us is, if you look at his book published in 2022 regarding values, he's made it very clear that he feels as though Western civilization is morally rotten to the core, consequent to capitalism. And he feels very strongly that in order to solve this, you're going to have to significantly restrict personal freedoms, certain industries, certain agriculture, and to control the financing of anything that is counter to the environmental social governance metrics that he is in favor of. So, before I go on, I want to take you back to 2003. So, some of you may have heard this question before, and I'm certain that the panel members have. In 2003, I was at the annual general meeting chatting privately of the Provincial Conservative Party, chatting privately with my friend Ralph Klein. And I said to Ralph in January of 2003, I said, "Ralph, I think I have a solution to fix the dysfunctional relationship between Alberta and Canada." And he looked at me, he says, "You do?" And I says, "Yeah, I think so. Would you like to hear about it?" And he said, "Absolutely." And I said, "Okay, well, it's based on this question. If Alberta was already a sovereign nation and you were the president or the prime minister of the sovereign country of Alberta, would you want Canada to join Confederation under the current terms and cost of membership?" And he looked at me and he smiled, and I'll always remember these words. He said, "To ask the question is to know the answer. Of course not." And I said, "Well, I'm glad you said that, because don't you think then that you have a moral, ethical, and economic responsibility to fix this dysfunctional relationship?" And he said, "Yeah, I guess I do." And I said, "Well, I'm working on a paper that once it's completed, I think will give you the algorithm, the pathway to solve this problem." And so over the next few months, I worked on this paper, and I had input from a number of other professionals, non-professionals, MLAs like Ted Morton, and federal MPs like Don Mazankowski, and many other people. And I met with Ralph in August of 2003 for about an hour and a half in his office, and talked about the key points. The document was entitled Alberta at the Crossroads, Status Quo, Refederation, Autonomy. In my mind, autonomy meant Alberta sovereignty, Alberta becoming an independent nation. But the essence of it was leverage. It was the means to solve the problem of the imbalance in power between the federal government and the provincial government. And that leverage can only come from a referendum on Alberta sovereignty, because there's no other way to force the opening and changing of the Constitution that in any way could meet the requirements that Alberta would like to see happen. So, well, what does sovereignty really mean? And I like to just touch on this for a second, because in a very simplistic way, sovereignty means self-governance without external interference. And if we take it down to the individual level, you are all sovereign to an extent, as an individual. You give up your sovereignty, that is, being in charge of controlling your future, controlling the what you are willing to buy in terms of goods and services. You give that up when you let another authority regulate you. You give that up when you let other authorities or governments take your money from you, which prevents you from purchasing the goods and services that you want for yourself and for your family and for your future. So think of sovereignty at the individual level. At the provincial level, it means something similar, doesn't it? Why is it that Bill 1 was passed by the UCP government? Bill 1 was the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act. Why was that enacted? Because the federal government kept encroaching on provincial constitutional authority, and it was costing us a lot of money, not just from this usurpation of our constitutional authority, but also the taxation that comes. Example, the carbon tax. So if we look at all of this in perspective, how did this all come about? And why are we in the mess that we are in? Well, the fix was in really from the get-go. You know that Alberta was incorporated into, along with Saskatchewan, September 1, 1905. Thanks to the efforts of Sir Clifford Sifton, the Minister of the Interior of the Liberal government of Sir Wilfrid Laurier. And I think it's very important to understand what he said to an audience in Winnipeg in 1904. Okay, so listen carefully. What he said to an audience in 1904, and it's in his book, Clifford Sifton, Volume 2, it's on page 95. What he said was, and I quote, "We desire, and all Canadian patriots desire." Now, Canadian patriots in 1904 were not anybody living in Alberta, in the regions of Alberta and Saskatchewan. Canadian patriots were the people living in the east. "We desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies," that's Alberta and Saskatchewan's wealth, "that the great trade of the prairies shall go to enrich," who? "Our people in the east, to build up our factories and our places of work, and every legitimate way contribute to its prosperity." Where did Alberta and Saskatchewan fit into that? We started off as a colony. We continued to be a colony, regulated into the ground and pillaged and plundered for the benefit of the East. And what can we do about it? Well, not very much, because really, to address the irritants, of which there are many, it requires opening and changing the Constitution. And the constitutional hurdles are impossible to overcome. So, how has this now been manifest? Well, we have lost over $800 billion given to Ottawa, consequent to equalization, consequent to the national energy policy, and consequent to other confiscatory policies from the federal government. And we haven't received a cent in return. And remember, it's already been touched on with respect to the national energy policy, the brainchild of Marc Lalonde, the Minister of Finance in the Pierre Elliott Trudeau government, who said, in justification of the national energy policy, we could not, quote, we have this on video, we could not let Alberta become the center of economic power in Canada, which it was becoming in the late 70s. All right, now when we look at this from another perspective, what have the policies generally been? Well, they've been anti-Alberta energy, you'd all agree with that. They've also been anti-agriculture. They've been anti the development of other natural resources. And it's already been touched on, but there's an update for you. The amount of money that we have lost in the last decade, or 14 years or so, has been $500 billion, not $100 billion. This was planned investment into Alberta, which has dried up. Why? Because of federal regulatory and taxation policy. This has also been articulated by our Premier. Moreover, as a consequence of not being able to get our oil and gas to international markets, we are losing roughly $26.5 billion every year, per the research study just released not too long ago, just a few days ago, by the Frontier Center for Public Policy. And then we look at the issue of values. Well, we have a very different value set. We're not particularly interested in keeping our natural resources in the ground. We're not particularly interested in a central bank digital currency which will control every aspect of our life. We're not particularly in agreement with diversity, equity, and inclusion policy or environmental, social, and governance policy. And we're not particularly keen about having our property confiscated, i.e. the firearms confiscation plan. And property rights, believe it or not, as David Lametti, the former Minister of Justice, has stated, Canadians don't have property rights. Canadians do not have the right to own property. And what's important about that is that if they can take your firearms, they can take anything from you. And that is absolutely true under our current Constitution. So let's look at health. Well, the World Health Organization pandemic treaty has been signed on to by the federal government. That means that something more like we faced with COVID could certainly come again, in which your freedoms and your mobility are completely restricted yet again. The Premier, though, has said that health is a provincial responsibility, and we're not going to listen to the dictates of the World Health Organization. That may be true, but guess what? Let's say, for example, the federal government wants to restrict your freedoms and your mobility because of some other pandemic. What can Danielle Smith do about that? She could say, well, we're not going to follow those dictates, which is implicit in what she said earlier. But how does the federal government then respond to that? The federal government responds by withholding transfer payments, right? So we give $70 billion a year to the federal government every year in taxes. We get back about $27 billion in transfers, federal transfers, social transfers, education transfers, health transfers, infrastructure transfers. So compliance is forced on a province, and this has happened multiple times, by withholding transfer payments. So we really don't have as much control as the Premier would suggest. And then let's look at the issue of our economic growth. Some of you may know that in terms of industrialized nations, Canada's economic growth is dead last. Why? Because of federal regulatory policies and taxation. So what can the Premier do about this? What are the demands that she's made? Well, she's made a number of demands, hasn't she? Notwithstanding to the former Prime Minister, but also to the current Prime Minister. And what has she said if we don't get these policies recognized in favor of Alberta? She said that, well, that's going to be a threat to national unity. But there are a number of things that she hasn't included in terms of clout, in terms of actually opening and changing the Constitution, such as, for example, taking control of federal taxation, getting out from under the inefficiencies of the Canada Health Act, ending equalization. These things require opening and changing the Constitution. So what has happened? Well, to try and get our way here in Alberta, there are some 18 lawsuits that have been launched by the provincial government against the federal government in a number of areas. Is that any way for a federation to operate? I don't think so. And with respect to litigation, litigation takes years and sometimes decades before it's finally resolved. Do we have that much time? I don't think so. Ladies and gentlemen, the solution for all of this really is for Alberta to become a sovereign nation. And there is a pathway, to achieve that. And it's been defined legally by the Clarity Act. And so we at the Alberta Prosperity Society, which governs the Alberta Prosperity Project, are following the letter of the law. But the benefits, just imagine this. We would be completely out from under all federal regulation and all federal taxation. And what would that mean for the average Alberta worker? Well, we've done the calculation. It looks like this. The average Alberta worker makes about $78,000 a year. But after all those taxes that person pays, he's left with actually $31,000 to $35,000 of actual purchasing power. Everything beyond that goes to taxes, one form or another. As a sovereign nation, that same individual would pay 8 to 10% maximum, meaning that he would have or she would have $68,000 to $70,000 of that $78,000 for actual purchasing power. What do you think about that? And of course, it's going to be variable depending on the tax bracket, but I thought it would be reasonable to look at the average worker in the province of Alberta. So that legal pathway to get out from under the oppression of the federal government in terms of regulation and taxation is defined by the Clarity Act. So the process is as follows. In May 2022, the Alberta government under Kenney passed the Citizens Initiative Act. Now, in order to have a referendum on constitutional change, according to the current legislation, which is still in place, it would require 600,000 people signing a petition to open and change the Constitution. And that those petition signatures would have to be collected within 90 days. So we at the Alberta Prosperity Society thought, well, that's impossible. So we came up with a workaround that not even Mr. Kenney could have contemplated. Sneaky. So what we decided to do is we said, well, we can't collect 600,000 signatures in 90 days, but what we can do is we can collect the contact information of 600,000 people. And once we have done that, then what we can do is we can submit the petition question to Elections Alberta. They can certify it, give us the Canvas petition sheets, and then we can go out and collect the actual signatures on the petition. But now we know where to go because we have the contact information with everybody. Now, in addition, many of you are aware that Bill 54 has gone through second reading and has achieved royal assent, but has not yet been proclaimed into law, and that won't happen until June. But the new threshold has been reduced from 600,000 to 177,000. And for your edification, the Alberta Prosperity Project already has the contact information of something north of 250,000 people. But what we'd like to do is we'd like to get to that actual original threshold of 600,000, 800,000, or 1 million, and we expect to be there by the end of August or September this year. Now, okay, so the process is as follows. We submit a petition according to the Citizens Initiative Act. it gets certified as a legitimate question, and we go out and we collect the signatures. Those petition signatures are then verified by Elections Alberta, and once verified, the petition is validated and it goes to the provincial government. Then it's up to the provincial government to hold the referendum. Now, they hold a referendum, and if the referendum is successful in terms of meeting the objectives of a clear question with a clear outcome, then the provincial government, for the first time in history, has solved the imbalance in power between the federal government and the provincial government, and now can negotiate from a position of strength. But that Clarity Act makes it very clear that if you're going to have a question on Alberta secession or any province wanting to leave Canada, you have to mean it. You can't be going into a referendum on Alberta sovereignty with the idea that you want to negotiate a better deal. The Clarity Act makes that very clear. So, therefore, the intent of the referendum then will be absolutely for Alberta to leave Canada. Then the negotiations are what's the outcome going to be for a sovereign nation. That's the way it works. Now, there's another thing that could happen, and there's a nuance here which I find quite fascinating. You'll recall, some of you, that when Kosovo declared its independence in February of 2008, following a successful referendum, it unilaterally declared its sovereignty. Do you know which two countries were the first to acknowledge Kosovo's sovereignty? Japan and Canada, 1 month later. So what I'm getting at is international law recognizes the will of the people as expressed in a referendum, and if it's a sovereignty referendum that meets the thresholds, then the international community, acknowledging that region's or that new country's sovereignty, legitimizes it by recognizing it and creates trade agreements and other sorts of arrangements with that country. Do you know which country would be the first country in the world that would acknowledge Alberta's sovereignty? The United States. We know that. All right. Now, I'm going to close with the same question that I posed to Ralph Klein to all of you. If Alberta was already a sovereign nation and Canada came to us and asked us if we would join Confederation under the current terms and cost of membership, is there anybody in this audience that would want to do that? No. All right. Okay, now here's your challenge. I set you up beautifully for this question. It is now your obligation, just like I said to Ralph, don't you think you have an obligation then to help us steer this bus towards Alberta sovereignty by getting other individuals also to register your contact information that you will support a petition on sovereignty that will lead to a referendum on sovereignty. And I encourage you therefore then to go to the website albertaprosperityproject.com and register your intent to support the petition and get as many other people as you can. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much.
That was absolutely awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of everybody's presentation today, we're going to have Q&A, so there'll be an opportunity for questions to be addressed to some of the individual speakers. But in the interest of moving forward, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mike Wagner. Do I get to call you that? Yeah. He's an author of note. He's got some fantastic books on the discussion of Alberta independence in the back of the room. Have a look. He's a proud Christian, and I am too. So I'm absolutely give me a warm welcome to Dr. Wagner.
Thank you, Todd. I just have to adjust the pages a bit for my eyes to make sure I can read the words properly, because I'm getting older and it's not like when I was young. Anyway, I want to explain why Alberta needs to become independent. Now, to understand the reason for Alberta to become, why we need to become independent, it's best to look at Alberta's history, because for several generations, Westerners have felt ignored and even exploited by Canada, and the sentiment building towards independence has been building over time as we experience these different exploitations. Now, when we look at the U.S. Declaration of Independence, it uses a phrase, a long train of abuses, to explain why the 13 colonies wanted to become independent from Britain. There have been a long train of abuses by the British government against the colonies, and Alberta has also experienced a long train of abuses over a long period of time from the Canadian government that justify why we become independent. Now, there's a sense in which Canadian Confederation has been unfair to the West right from the very beginning, as Todd mentioned. Like, this part of the world used to be called Rupert's Land. It was owned by Hudson's Bay Company, and Canada purchased Rupert's Land and annexed it to Canada without consulting the people that were here. There was already people here, especially in the Red River settlement. There was thousands of people. Some of them had a different idea of what their political future could be, but they weren't given a choice. They were just annexed to Canada without being consulted. Now, of course, afterwards, the prairies were settled by pioneers who would create farms, which was really good, but our farmers were forced to pay extra money for their farming equipment because there was a tariff to protect the manufacturers in Eastern Canada, so our farmers had to pay more. When we sold our grain, the farmers had to pay they had to sell their grain through middlemen, so they lost some money that way, and they also had to pay their transportation costs. So they didn't get as much money for their grain as they should have. So they're paying more for their equipment and getting less for their grain because of how Canada was set up. Now, this kind of a situation, led to many people being unhappy within Western Canada. These kinds of grievances kept many Westerners unhappy, but they were not angry enough to look towards independence. Instead of looking towards independence, they created reform political movements. Especially, they turned away from the mainstream political parties, and they created alternative political parties. Among those were like the United Farmers of Alberta, which had a government here in the 1920s. And in the federal level, it was the Progressive Party of Canada in the 1920s was most popular in Alberta. But the biggest change of all, actually, came when we elected a social credit government in 1935. Now, electing a social credit government set Alberta apart from the rest of the world. It was worldwide news when Alberta elected that social credit government in 1935. And this is what Ted Byfield, the founder of Alberta Report, said about that election of 1935. While other provinces whined about the Depression, Alberta acted. We would not acquiesce in the misery we felt and saw around us. We would fight. We would rebel. If anything is characteristic of this province, it's that spirit of defiance. Push us far enough and we will strike back. That was our record and that is our reputation. So Albertans did fight back against Central Canada, but not to the point of looking towards independence. That all changed in 1968 when Pierre Trudeau became Prime Minister. When Pierre Trudeau became Prime Minister, a threshold was crossed, and for the first time, Westerners began to talk about independence seriously. Now, one of the things that Trudeau did that made Westerners unhappy was he brought in the Official Languages Act, which made French much more prominent in Western Canada, and a lot of people in the West felt we were having French thrust down our throats. But that was a relatively minor thing compared to what he would do afterwards. Now, so he became Prime Minister in 1968. He brought in the Official Languages Act. Some people started thinking about independence. The first book on Western independence was written in 1971. It was called The Unfinished Revolt, Some Views on Western Independence. It was a collection of essays edited by John Barr and Owen Anderson. And that's significant because John Barr was the executive assistant to Alberta's Minister of Education, and Owen Anderson was the executive assistant to Alberta's Premier, Harry Strom, our last social credit Premier. So these were significant people with significant profiles. Now, the only essay that really dealt much with independence was John Barr's. His idea was this: first, we need to try to fix Canada, and if we can't fix Canada, then we need to be moving towards independence. And he wrote that in 1971, and that was an excellent idea in 1971. Let's try and fix Canada first. But that was more than 50 years ago. We've been trying for more than 50 years. It's no longer a good idea because we've tried it and it hasn't worked. Anyway, the most significant thing that happened that caused people to think about Western independence resulted from the energy crisis of 1973. There was a war in the Middle East in 1973, and oil prices skyrocketed. The oil prices went from about $3 a barrel to about $12 a barrel in just a few weeks. And so Alberta could finally cash in on our oil resources. Like, oil at $3 a barrel had been pretty good for Alberta for many years, but now we could really cash in. This was the only major resource that we had. And at that time, they thought we might only have 10 years or so of oil resources. They didn't have the technology we had at the time. So we really had to get our money's worth at that time so we could build for the future with a heritage fund, and then we'd have money for the future when the oil ran out. But Pierre Trudeau did a couple of things to make sure Alberta could not capitalize on the oil like we ought to. He brought in an export tax on oil, which meant when our oil was exported to the United States, the federal government would take a huge share of that revenue that should have gone to Alberta. And our Premier, Peter Lougheed, called that export tax on oil the biggest ripoff of any province that's ever occurred in Confederation's history. And at that point it was, in 1973. Now, the NEP would be worse, but at that point that was the worst thing. The other thing Trudeau did was he kept the price of oil within Canada low. So we didn't get a full world price when we sold our oil within Canada. So whether we exported it or sold it within Canada, we were not getting the money we should have for our oil. So throughout the 1970s, our Premier, Peter Lougheed, fought with Trudeau over these things, trying to get a fair deal for Alberta. There was a federal election in 1979 when Joe Clark's Progressive Conservatives were elected as a minority government. It was expected he'd do better for Alberta than Trudeau, and he would have, but his government fell after just a few short months, so it was a new federal election in 1980, and this 1980 federal election is very significant. During this campaign, the Trudeau Liberals made it very clear that they would favor the eastern provinces over the western provinces on energy issues in particular. And that was the time when Keith Davey, the Liberal activist, made that famous statement where he was describing this election, that their slogan was, "Screw the West, we'll take the rest." Now, the idea of running an election campaign by attacking one particular region was new and extremely divisive. Like Canada is a large country with many regions. The regions have competing interests. So the purpose of the national government, or one of the purposes of the national government, is to try and accommodate various regions to create national unity. But here we had a federal political party, the Liberal Party of Canada under Pierre Trudeau, deliberately exploiting regional divisions for political benefit. And this is really significant and important to remember. Pierre Trudeau was telling Central Canadians that Alberta was the bad guy, and he would put Alberta in its place. So we have to keep in mind that a lot of the divisions we have in Canada trace back to Pierre Trudeau and the Liberal Party of Canada deliberately enhancing regional divisions for political benefit. So Westerners, of course, were angry when Pierre Trudeau was re-elected in 1980. He brought in the National Energy Program, as we heard about. The National Energy Program was an attempt by the federal government to take more control of Alberta's industry, oil industry, and to push Alberta down. And of course, the NEP devastated many Albertans. And I've had people come up to me at meetings and say, my dad lost his job at that time, or my parents lost their houses. There's people alive today, many, who were affected by that policy, by deliberate government policy to hurt Alberta. Like, it wasn't an accident. That's what they were trying to do. So Trudeau's anti-Alberta policies permanently changed Alberta's political culture. Before 1980, when surveys were done on independence in Alberta, support levels were in the single digits, like 4, 5, 6%, something like that. Since 1980, when they do surveys on Alberta independence, it's always in the double digits, like as low as 15 or 16% many years ago, but consistently 20% or more since then. That was a permanent change in Alberta's political culture that was a result of Pierre Trudeau and his policies, and that's why I say Pierre Trudeau is the father of the Alberta separatist movement. Anyway, as a result of the support for separatism at that time, there was a by-election in 1982, and Gordon Klessler of the Western Canada Concept Party was elected because there was so much support for independence. But even though many Albertans were looking to independence at that time, there were many others who were talking about that idea of let's try to reform Canada first, as John Barr had talked about. Now, among those people were Senator Ernest Manning, who had been Alberta's longest-serving premier. Him and a couple other prominent citizens wrote a book in 1981 called Regional Representation, the Canadian Partnership. Now, their idea was to reform national institutions so that Western voices could be heard within the national government. Their main proposal was for Senate reform. We could reform the Senate so that our voice as Albertans could be heard within the national government so that we wouldn't be ignored. So we could change national institutions that way. And they proposed this in 1981 because that's when the constitutional discussions were being taken. So they were the provinces and the federal government had the opportunity at that time to change our national institutions. Our voices could be heard, and then we wouldn't feel alienated. We wouldn't feel like we're being ignored out west. But of course, they were ignored. Now, Pierre Trudeau resigned in 1984. He was replaced by John Turner. There was a federal election. Brian Mulroney was elected, and people in Alberta felt relief because all of our MPs were progressive conservative. We saw Mulroney as the guy that was going to save us from what Pierre Trudeau was doing. So it was time to relax. Everything was good. But it turned out not to be so good because just like any other federal government, a progressive conservative federal government has to cater to central Canada if it wants to stay in power. That's the way the Canadian system works. And so an issue came up in 1986. Canada had recently bought the CF-18 fighter jets. Those CF-18 fighter jets had to be maintained. It was a very expensive government contract involving a lot of money. There was 2 cities in Canada with the facilities that could maintain those CF-18 jets, Winnipeg and Montreal. So the government held a competition to see which of those cities would be best at maintaining it. Winnipeg won the contract on the basis of the government criteria, so Mulroney awarded the contract to Montreal. obviously for political reasons. This is just because, like I mentioned, the Canadian political system is set up so that if you want to be in power, you want to remain in power, you have to cater to central Canada. Now, the result of that uproar from the CF-18 issue led to the creation of the Reform Party of Canada. Of course, the Reform Party's motto was, "The West wants in," and this reflects what Ernest Manning had been talking about. We need a political system that represents the West, gets our voice within the national government so they could hear us and not keep ignoring us. Now, this is a photocopy of a pamphlet I brought from 1987. It's from the Reform Association of Alberta. This is the proposal for the Reform Party of Canada in 1987. I just want to read you a couple of sentences from here to get an idea what they're talking about. Throughout our history, Ontario and Quebec have held the lion's share of political influence in Canada, and they continue to dominate the national scene at the expense of the West. Our political and economic development is being hamstrung by the vested interests of the Golden Triangle establishment of Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. The Western economy continues to languish, and Western influence in national economic and political decision-making is insufficient to bring about meaningful change. This is written 38 years ago, and the exact same words apply today. Nothing has changed in 38 years. Now, the following year, in 1988, there was a progressive conservative MP in Edmonton named David Kilgour, and he wrote a book called Uneasy Patriots, Western Canadians and Confederation. And he wanted to explain to people why Western Canadians feel upset within Canada, and he came to this, he explained why, and this is the conclusion he reached. The time has come to address a long-standing injustice and bring the West into equal partnership with all other regions of the country. So in 1988, he's saying the time has come to fix this inequality. Like, that's 37 years ago. And at that time, it did look like the time had come because the Reform Party was really getting going at that time, and Westerners were getting behind the Reform Party. It looked like things were going to change in our benefit. Because, yeah, like I said, with the Reform Party, it looked like the time had come. The Reform Party proposed a Triple E Senate. That'd be a Senate that was elected by the people, because, of course, we don't have elected senators. There'd be equal number of senators from each province, and they'd have effective power. So a Senate like that would have represented Western interests in the federal government. But the federal government is not interested in that. So the Reform Party won, 52 seats in the 1993 election. They won more seats the following election, but over time the Reform Party turned away from its emphasis on Western issues and became more and more focused on achieving national government. They transformed themselves into the Canadian Alliance. Then the Canadian Alliance joined with the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada in 2003 to form the new Conservative Party of Canada under Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper became Prime Minister in 2006. As Todd mentioned, he was a good Prime Minister compared to others, and he was trusted by Westerners because he was one of the original reformers. He'd been a Reform Party MP. He was an MP from Calgary. So as long as Stephen Harper was in power, Westerners could trust him to do what's best for us. Anyway, though, as we know, Justin Trudeau was elected in 2015, and he brought in an anti-energy policy program. Todd mentioned some of these, the No More Pipelines Act, the Alberta tanker ban, and other policies that essentially were harming Alberta's oil industry. Like the Constitution guarantees provincial ownership and control of natural resources and oil development, but these policies by Trudeau essentially subverted the Constitution. They undermined the constitutional provision for the provinces to control those things, and they were putting federal government control over what we were doing. Now, so far I've just talked about the bad news. I'm coming to an end here, but as has been mentioned by Dr. Modry, there is a constitutional pathway for a province to become independent. In 1995, the federal government sent a reference case to the Supreme Court asking if Quebec could unilaterally secede from Canada, and the court said Quebec could not unilaterally secede from Canada. However, if Quebec held a referendum on independence with a clear question and a clear majority voted in favor of independence, then the federal government would have an obligation to negotiate Quebec's independence. So the point is, there's a peaceful, constitutional, and legal pathway for every province in Canada to pursue independence, and this is very different from many other countries because most other countries don't allow that kind of thing to take place. Okay, all of this leads to the conclusion that Alberta must become independent. Over the last several decades, there have been many proposals by serious people how to improve Alberta's situation within Canada. I've mentioned John Barr in 1971, Ernest Manning and his colleagues in 1981, David Kilgour in 1988. These were all significant citizens, but their proposals were ignored. Most significant of all was Preston Manning and the Reform Party. Alberta voted overwhelmingly for the Reform Party and sent mostly Reform Party MPs to Ottawa during the 1990s. They were good people and they tried to do their best for the West, but they found that the system could not be fixed. That is the message of the experience of the Reform Party. Canada's political system cannot be fixed in a way that is beneficial for Alberta. We can learn from history, and we must learn from history. If Preston Manning and the Reform Party could not get a Triple E Senate and otherwise reform Canada's political system, then it cannot be done. The West has tried to fix Canada. The West has tried to fix Canada, but Canada does not want to be fixed. Therefore, the only remaining alternative is to get out. Thank you.
Well done. Yeah, well done. Truer words have never been spoken. There's no fixing this. Anybody who thinks that we're going to somehow talk nicely and go to Ottawa and with our hat in hand, son of a gun, we really do want to get along with you. Guess what? They don't want to get along with us. They've been fighting against us since the beginning. When it's all said and done, the name Trudeau has been a cancer to this nation since 1967. He is the father of this separation movement. Anyway, we're moving ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce Vince Byfield. As I say, Vince is a very passionate Albertan. He's the holder of the legacy of the Byfield name, the Byfield political thought process, and I'm absolutely delighted to be sharing the stage with you here today, Vince. So over to you.
Thank you, everybody. All right. I actually think that what I have to say is complements a lot of what Mike has, because he's mentioned my father a few times, and he's seen him in print, and I've known the man in person for 56 years. So I can add to a little bit. I can flesh out some of the things that Mike has said. So I'm just going to be reading from this. For the most part, guys, I'm doing you a favor, but that way I'll be able to get through it all fairly quickly. Good people of Brooks and surrounding area, the reason you are about to hear 15 minutes of homegrown Edmonton hot air is because of one man, Todd Beasley. Some of you may be familiar with the marketing term product placement. Well, I'm about to use a variant of that, which I call blame placement. Over the course of the next 15 minutes, if your head winds up landing in the lap of the person beside you because you've fallen asleep, blame Todd. Or if the reverse happens and you find yourself getting so worked up, so angry that you begin thinking in your mind that Byfield doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground, excuse my French, then remember, don't blame me, blame Todd. But if the reverse happens and you conclude that after the next 15 minutes that it wasn't an utter waste of time, then thank not me, definitely not Todd. Thank God. Because God is the reason that I live and breathe before you today. God is the reason that we are all living and breathing on one of the most beautiful places in the entire world, Alberta. So on that note, and because we have some very important things to talk about today, I'd like to start with a prayer. Holy Heavenly Father, we thank you for blessing us with a land of opportunity, a land where your spiritual gift of free will, equally given to every soul, prevails over man's carnal instinct to rule over other men. Father, we do earnestly repent for every time we have spoken an unkind word to a family member or friend. Forgive us, Father, for every time we have lectured more than listened. Help us to be more mindful of the fact that you blessed us with 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Father, we gather here today to discover your will for what is right to do for our families, our province, and our nation going forward. Heavenly Father, we invite your precious Holy Spirit to join us now in this hall, so that the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts may be acceptable in your sight. In Jesus' name, amen. And on a personal note, Lord, help me to keep these people awake for the next 15 minutes. Now, I've broken the rest of my speech into 3 parts: the past, the present, and the future. So if your eyelids are starting to droop, or if you find yourself at risk of snoring, and you hear the words, the present, come from my lips, cheer up. We're halfway through. And when you hear the words, the future, you're entering the home stretch, baby. All right, the past. If Mr. Harper thinks that Alberta can merely proceed to exercise the same autonomy Quebec now does, he is dreaming. Quebec is a special case. It is, these, by the way, I'm sorry, are the words of my father in response to the firewall letter. So, if Quebec is a special case. It is, we are constantly told, distinct. What makes it special? Its language, its cultural heritage. Yes, but it always has had those, and nobody outside of Quebec gave a damn. Such autonomy as Quebec possesses was achieved in just one way. It made convincing threats to leave. The lesson is plain, Byfield continued. These are actually Wagner's words here a bit. If you really want change, you must threaten to leave and mean it, period. If we fail to understand this, we are not being patriotic. We are being stupid. Crassly, arrogantly, blindly stupid. I'm going to read several quotes for you afterward, and I'm going to ask you one question, so pay close attention. We believe the time has come for Albertans to take greater charge of our future. Somebody wrote that. I'm going to ask you who in a bit. We propose that our province withdraw from the Canada Pension Plan to create an Alberta Pension Plan. We should have our own provincial police force. We have no doubt that Alberta can run a more efficient and effective police force than Ottawa can. One that will not be misused as a laboratory for experiments in social engineering. We believe it is imperative for you to take all possible political and legal measures to reduce the financial drain on Alberta caused by Canada's tax and transfer system. The most recent Alberta Treasury estimates are that Albertans transfer $2,600 per capita annually to other Canadians for a total outflow from our province approaching $8 billion a year. The same federal politicians who accuse us of not sharing their, quote, Canadian values have no compunction about appropriating our Canadian dollars to buy votes elsewhere in the country. So my question to you is this. Who was the lead signatory of that letter that I have been quoting from? Anyone? Stephen Harper. The lead signatory of this letter, written in 2001 and now known as the Firewall Letter, would go down and would go on to hold the most powerful office in the country, Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper. The Firewall Letter was addressed to Ralph Klein, Premier of Alberta, who responded to it in the February 9, 2001 edition of the Edmonton Journal with the following. Your letter seems to imply that the federal government has, in effect, lost its legitimacy to govern for Alberta. You need some more context here. The Firewall Letter was written shortly after the Liberals under Jean Chrétien had won their third consecutive term, and Western Canadians, especially Albertans, were deeply upset that their faithful support for the federal Conservative Party was not able to prevent Ottawa from continuing to unequally steal from Albertans via taxation. Sound familiar? Although this took place almost a quarter century ago, it is essentially a carbon copy of where we are again today. Just 2 weeks ago, the rest of Canada just voted in the Liberals for a fourth consecutive term. Premier Ralph Klein continues in his response to the Firewall Letter to essentially agree that most of its recommendations, but that the obstacle to achieving them was Ottawa, not Alberta. But here's the kicker. Stephen Harper, the lead signature of that Firewall Letter, goes on to form Government of Canada in 2006, the most powerful political office in the nation for the next 9 years. And while he's Prime Minister, Ralph Klein is still Premier of Alberta, followed by Ed Stelmach. All three are Conservatives. All three are Albertans. Working together, they have the power to achieve the objectives of the Firewall Letter, and yet here we are, 24 years later, with not one single objective achieved. There's one last point I want to make about the Firewall Letter before I wrap up this section, and that is the response to it by my father, founder of Alberta Report magazine, which in the decade before had reached a peak readership of 500,000, or one Albertan in 5. And so I've already actually read that part to you. So, sorry, misplaced. So the lesson is plain. If you really want change, you must threaten to leave and mean it. Period. If we fail to understand this, we are not being patriotic. We are being stupid. Crassly, arrogantly, blindly stupid. I'd like to note on a personal note, in all my decades reading and desktop publishing my father's writing, I seldom recall him writing in such strong language. The present. Woohoo, halfway. All right, if you're falling asleep, you know who to blame, right? Todd. In 2022, the Fraser Institute reported that from 2007 to 2022, Albertans contributed almost $250 billion more to the federal government than it received back in federal spending. Earlier in 2019, then Premier Jason Kenney stated that between 1961 and 2019, Alberta's net contribution was $622 billion, which worked out to $3,344 annually per person in 2019 dollars. For a family of four, that is $13,000 more given than received every single year for almost 50 years, a half century. $13,000 a family every year for 50 years. To his credit, Premier Kenney initiated a 2021 province-wide referendum on the matter, and not surprisingly, the majority of Albertans voted to have this equalization program stopped. It's now 4 years later. We're still paying it. And we're still being forced to pay it, even though we voted against it. That, my friends, is called taxation without representation. It's also called theft. I remember asking my dad about a year before he passed this question. If a man is caught breaking into our house and takes $10,000 from us at gunpoint, that man goes to jail if he's caught. But what happens when a federal government goes into every home in the entire province and steals more than $10,000 from every family year after year for decades? My dad's response, in Canada, they get re-elected. He laughed, but it was a bittersweet laugh. The last election just happened proves once again how prescient my father was. So that's the summary of the financial pickle we're in. So what do we do about it? In Dad's response to the 2000 firewall letter, he described three possible solutions. The first is a fixed Canada. In other words, where every province is truly equal and every province has full control over their resources and every province is as autonomous as possible. This is the solution that Dad spent his entire life trying to achieve, as it is for our current premier and for every premier we have had since we became a province. The second possible solution Dad described is for Alberta to become an independent nation. This nation would no longer have to fork out tens of thousands of dollars per family to a government in Ottawa that did very little back. But that nation would be landlocked, and we would be dependent on its neighbors in order to get coastal access to deliver our oil and gas and other products to the world. I must confess to you that Dad never really liked this option. He had lived through World War II. He knew people who had died to defend Canada. The thought of Canada falling apart on his watch, I think, depressed him. The third possibility, Dad really didn't consider, mainly because I think he worked so hard on the first one to fix Canada. And that was for Alberta to become a united state. But I can tell you that Dad, in the last few years of his life, began to consider that option more and more. He was a seasoned journalist, and he knew that what often happened to small nations by big nations. But as he was writing the last 3 volumes of his 12-book history series, This is a plug, by the way. The books are in the back. The Christians, their first 2,000 years, Dad came to truly appreciate the seismic contribution to freedom in the world by our neighbor to the south. And as he watched the populist rise of Donald Trump's first presidency, I think he started to realize that the average Albertan shares far more in common with the average American than they do with the average Ontarian. In his final years, my father's famous energy did not occur very often, especially during COVID, but our conversation on possible American statehood truly excited him. In fact, I remember him saying, in very excited terms, "That could work." That's my dad impersonation. The future. Well, we're in the home stretch now, baby. For those supporting the fixed Canada camp, there are some tough foundational questions that need answering. Canada's parliamentary system is based on the British Westminster system of government. This political structure has developed over 800 years to serve people who live on an island that is 130,000 square kilometers in size. Oops, I just lost myself here. Sorry. That may sound like a lot, but not when you live in a country the size of Canada, the second largest country by area in the world. Guess how many Englands fit into one Canada? Curious. 25, 151. Any others? The answer is 77. So when setting up their government for land much larger than Britain, the American founding fathers realized a serious problem of regional alienation would inevitably develop. So they adjusted the bicameral system of government so that the upper house, what they call the Senate, would restrict each state to have only 2 representatives or senators. In contrast, the lower house, the House of Representatives, where laws are introduced as represented by population, the 2 houses act as a check and balance to avoid majority tyranny. And for the last 250 years, it has worked out quite well. Canada, on the other hand, with a country that wound up becoming even larger than the United States, decided to take the British parliamentary system and essentially adjust nothing. If we were liking it to a transportation system, it's as if the Americans took a British car and turned it into a locomotive where you add as many additional cars to the train as you want. But Canada, or more accurately Ontario, took the British Mini Cooper, designed for the tiny country of England, added Quebec as the passenger, and then jammed into this tiny car 11 more provincial and territorial passengers to join them in the political ride of life. Picture the jalopy from the Beverly Hillbillies careening down the political highway, but with a much smaller vehicle. Ontario is at the wheel. Quebec is in the passenger seat, constantly telling Ontario how to drive. Alberta is with all the other provinces packed in the back, trying to make sure there's enough gas in the tank and it doesn't run empty. And every time Alberta says, "I don't think this is a good idea," everybody else snaps at Alberta to shut up and keep feeding the gas tank. The 6 Canadian people have to fix this, and the problem is so foundational, so fundamental, that I personally think the challenge is too enormous, and I don't think it can be done without starting over. And that is something that Ontario and Quebec will never agree to. These last 2 points, I'm going to be winging it because I don't have my script, but I wanted to talk a little bit about, often I've heard people who are in favor of sovereignty likening the relationship to a marriage. And Alberta is the abused spouse. But not too many people talk about the abuser. And I think that's an interesting point, because often when you have scenarios like this, the abuser is themselves suffering. And I think as Christians, we need to look at our neighbor, and this is the rest of Canada, and try to understand why they are as abusive as they are. And I think it's because they're suffering. In a relationship, often alcohol is at play, or drugs, or another woman. And when the abused spouse tries to fix the issue, the response is unnatural anger. Because the person who is the abuser is defensive. They know in deep down that what they're doing is wrong, but they don't want to admit it. And I think that's what's going on here. I think what we have is a situation where the abuser, or in this case, the rest of Canada, particularly Ontario and Quebec, are addicted to our money. We saw that when President Trump was talking to our Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister at the time, Justin Trudeau, said, if you take away the subsidies, Canada will fail as a country. And we are the same. We have been subsidizing them, and it's not sustainable. And it's just I think the only way it can ever be fixed, just like if a person is addicted, the only way it can ever be fixed is, first of all, they have to admit to the problem. And we're nowhere near that. It's been essentially 120 years, and they're still not admitting the problem. That's the first step. Sooner or later, we have to recognize that, hopefully sooner. And they also must be repentant, and we're nowhere close to that as well. And the last thing they have to do is they have to hit bottom. That's usually the route of an alcoholic, is they have to hit bottom. And it's a necessary step. And they're not doing that either. But it's interesting, because when you look back at our history, what you were talking about, in a way, Alberta hit bottom back in 1935. We, at that point, there's an interesting document in the back there. It's William Aberhart's, I call it William Aberhart's PowerPoint presentation from 1940 for his re-election. It's a fascinating document. It's 3 feet high, 2 feet wide. It's made out of canvas. I encourage you to take a look at it. Anyway, he describes in there that when he took power in 1935, interest on the debt from the previous 6 premiers was now 33 cents on the dollar. He had a budget of $18 million, and he had to spend $6 million of that to pay interest on the debt. We're coming into numbers that high again, ratio-wise. And to the credit of the Social Credit Party, as far as I can tell, in the 35 years, not only did we have a premier every single Sunday on the radio talking about the Bible, absolutely unheard of before, but we also had a government that never declared a deficit in 35 years, as far as I know. And it's interesting to think, and they did that because, first of all, they couldn't declare deficits. Essentially, the banks had cut them off. But then later, when money started to roll in through Leduc and other things, they maintained that principle. In fact, Preston Manning told me at one point, when I was trying to find out if the Socreds had ever declared a deficit, he didn't think so either. He said he remembers when they first had their first budget, and it was $1 billion, and he was excited as a young man that the government was about to spend $1 billion. And the Minister of Finance looked at him and snapped and said, "You young folk have no appreciation of the dangers of debt." And he was absolutely right. Progressive conservatives, the one distinction between them and the Social Credit Party is they play fast and loose with debt, in my opinion. Yes, Klein got it down to 0, but then he just jacked it back up again. So anyway, I'm probably over, aren't I? Almost done. Okay. So how do we achieve a successful referendum? I would say, first of all, buy this man's books. And buy Cory's book as well. We need to be informed, and they have done an excellent job of that. So please buy their books. Not necessarily for you. Please read them if you haven't already, but use them to share with your neighbors, because we can do this. pretty much, we're showing now pretty consistently 1 in 3 Albertans are ready to leave. If every one of those were able to focus on a neighbor or a friend or a family member who they know is still uncertain, or even better, actually, averse to independence, don't be confrontational. Love them. Just talk about the facts. Just ask the questions. Why? Just inquire. The discovery process that the two of you will go through will not only build the friendship between you, but you will probably convince them that freedom is the way to go. That's it. Thank you. Oh, and my wife would be remiss. Please come see our table for the books and help me put food on the table. Thank you.
You know, talking about debt, the East, we had Harper, as I said earlier, arguably one of the greatest, best prime ministers this country's ever had. If we stuck with Harper, we would be out of debt with money in the bank. His economic projections and his plan would clearly have got us there. He had a plan where we would be out of debt within 10 years. Instead, Manitoba East, in an election you had no input into whatsoever, they elected a failed substitute drama teacher, and as a result of that, our nation is now $1.4 trillion in debt. The economic implications for each and every family in this country that might want to buy a house, it's $2,000 to $3,000 per year in mortgage costs. That's what the bond implication is. Can you imagine the societal investments we could have made if we weren't paying the interest on $1.4 trillion? From the weakest members of our society, to infrastructure, to research and development, to our pension plan. Imagine doubling our pension plan because we've got the resources to do it. All of these things, on and on and on. And these are the types of things in terms of quantifiable benefits that an independent West can bring forward. I'm not a 51st stater guy, and we'll talk about economic union versus political union in a little bit here, but we've got to get going on with our speakers, and it is my honor, and please help me welcome to the stage Michael Wagner. Michael is an author. Oh, sorry, Cory. Jesus. Yeah, I got an hour's sleep last night. Yeah, I'm looking at you. Yeah, Cory Morgan. Cory's an author. He's a journalist with the Western Standard, and if you read Derek's paper, you'd absolutely support pretty much everything that comes out of Cory's mouth, because I think that fundamentally it is absolutely in support of all of our values. So please help me in welcoming everybody.
Here, I'll set a stopwatch. So I'm going to start by quoting from an author, one of my favorite authors, me. Actually, I'm quoting from one of my least favorite publications. It's in my book, though. This is from the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Globe. It described Western separatism as primitive and confused, groping for a platform and searching for a leader. Well, there's a bit of truth to that, you know. But the bigger issue is that this headline's from December 1980. 45 years. Now, if we have a headline that somebody could read and see as appropriate 45 years ago and think that it would actually match the circumstances of today, we're doing something terribly wrong. We're making the same mistakes over and over and over again. I'm fantastic at making mistakes. My long-suffering wife can attest to that. But what I'm good at is making so many that I almost never repeat them. So I can keep making new ones, and eventually we're going to run out of mistakes. And that means we're going to find the solution. Because the support for Western independence is, you know, the movement has been trying to go for almost 50 years now. And we're getting a little bit closer all the time, but we're still not there. So we've got to look back a bit and make sure we aren't trying the same tactics and strategies now that we tried 45 years ago, or even 20 years ago. I founded the Alberta Independence Party back in 2000, so I guess 25 years ago. Man, it goes. And we ran into the 2001 election, and Ralph Klein mopped the floor with us. Just solidly trounced us. But I learned a lot. I sure learned a lot. And then the party fell apart due to infighting and blew up. A large part due to my inexperienced leadership and just that cranky nature of independence-minded folks in general. We're hard to keep together. It's great to see this many in the room. Nobody's even fought yet. So, give me some time. And then I look at the 2023 election, the provincial one. We had 5 independence-minded parties running in that one. If you add the vote of all 5 of those parties together, it totals 0.8%. Some very good people worked very hard and ran for those parties, and they made some very good points. But when you smack your face on a wall, you have to kind of start reevaluating your strategy. And the party approach isn't working. I'm kind of fearful when some people are talking about trying it again. If we go into the next provincial election, if indeed an independence party starts to get strong, and I mean strong by meaning where it can gain 10% of the vote, you'd be able to say, hello, Premier Nenshi. And we're never going to get another referendum again. So let's learn. You know, let's dedicate our energy, our resources to what works. I'm not looking to knock the people working on the parties. I'm just saying we've learned and proven that route just isn't quite getting us where we want to go, so let's examine different ones. And something that we're facing that's different this time, different than ever in the history of Alberta. We're living in a period of history. We will have a referendum on independence. That's pretty much assured now. I mean, some of the date, hopefully it's maybe early 2026. Premier Smith has given us the means to pursue that and hold that referendum. It's never been done. Also means we can make a bunch more new mistakes on the way there, so we got to be careful. But it gives us a focal point. It gives us a target. It gives us something much more simple and attainable, something where multiple groups, multiple individuals can, as long as we're always focused on that target of a yes vote, then we're making progress towards it. See, that's the hard part with party politics. Party politics are competitive by nature. You're too busy scrapping with each other at times and forgetting the principles that you formed the party to pursue in the first place. But if we're all just looking at a yes vote, we don't have to get along with each other. We just have to know we're all going in the same direction. If we look in recent history, Brexit, and the attitudes are pretty similar. That, at the beginning, when it came about, the Prime Minister was so confident the UK was just, let them have it. You know what? Let's let them just vote on it. They'll get their 20%, it'll be out of the way, and it'll be done. And the academics and the pundits and the usual establishment sorts said, you know, the unwashed, just let them have their thing, it won't happen. Boy, were they in for a shock, weren't they? But that's because the movement developed underneath them. It developed despite them. That's what grassroots is about. That's bypassing the establishment. And the establishment has got a different attitude today than they did the last time they faced an independence referendum. I know there's a few of us in here old enough to remember the 90s. And remember the attitude towards Quebec when that 95 referendum was being held. They sent literally busloads of people out to Quebec. The attitude was one of groveling and begging. Please don't leave us, Quebec. Please, we love you. We love you. We'll buy more poutine. We'll send more transfer payments. We'll even cheer the Habs once. Whatever it takes. Please stay. Well, here we are today. And what are they saying? You selfish jerks in Alberta shouldn't even hold a referendum. How dare you? You don't have the right to even talk about it. Look at some of the headlines. You want to read snotty Laurentian elitism? Read Andrew Coyne. Make sure your stomach's settled, though. And what they're talking about, what the people out front, they were much more polite than Mr. Coyne. But you notice what they were protesting out front, the little elbows up chickens out there? They were protesting Bill 54. They aren't even protesting independence. They're protesting our right and ability to have a vote on it. They don't want us to even be able to mark that ballot. They're anti-freedom. They're anti-choice. And they're scared. That's why they're not challenging the concept of independence. They're challenging the ability of getting it, which is very, very important. Some of them do know that this could turn into Brexit. This could expand and grow and lead to that positive vote. But, and there's a big but, we aren't there yet. We got a lot of people, and I've been kind of calling for in public on my columns and social media, tap the brakes a bit. I know we're upset, we're eager, we've got the means, but folks, we aren't there yet. And if we blow it, we might not get another chance for 5 or 10 more years. So let's make sure we do this right. It's not like something we can run every 6 months until we figured it out. It's going to take a lot of resources, a lot of energy, and then a cool down period if we don't get over the line the first time. And polling is amazing. I mean, we've never really seen this kind of polling support for independence. We're seeing it in the 36, possibly 40% range. But remember, that's polling for a losing vote. That's not a winning condition. That's an incredible base to begin from. A fantastic base to begin from. I'm certain Brexit began with a smaller base than that. Many, many revolutions began with a smaller base of support than that. But it's not there. So, geez, don't call a question when you only got 40% support. That's just asking to kick it down the road. You want to know one of the people who said, let's hold that referendum right away? Naheed Nenshi. Because whatever he might be, and there's a lot of things he might be, if you want to read my columns, I've gone on many, many times about what Mr. Nenshi is. But he's not stupid. And he knows that the best way to kill this thing would be to hold it in 2 months, have it fail, and then he'll make Premier Smith wear it and run in the next election on it. But he's terrified if this runs at a year from now, we get our act together. So who's going to do it, though? There's one of the great things about being in the West, though. And this is where we've got so much potential and opportunity to do this. Because we're Westerners. We're not waiting for someone else to do stuff for us. We're not asking for other people to do stuff for us. We get up and do it ourselves. If the people who settled out here on that parched land and then later freezing land and then parched again managed to stubbornly get through and turn this into an agricultural powerhouse, a freedom-loving new part of Canada, that's people who just want the opportunity to do it themselves. And that's what we'll do. So that's where the call to action comes out. That's what I talk about a lot, is we have to get out there and turn that 36% into a 55% in a referendum. Media blowhards like me have a role, and academics have a role, and all sorts of people. It's important. But you know, the most important person, if you're turning a person's view, people who are on the fence, people who are thinking about it, it's your family members. It's your coworkers. It's the person sitting next to you at the hockey game. It's the guy you're sharing a beer with at the front of the pub. One-on-one conversations. That's what turns people over. I mean, all of the rest is important, but it's for a true grassroots thing, it's the one-on-one. But you have to do it tactically. You have to come into it with a plan. And it's not just my self-serving plug for the book, but I think it couples great with Michael's fantastic books, because he's written so many on the why to go. And my book, as I call it, the handbook, because it's focused on the how. It's focused on the most common questions people always ask, and they're genuine, legitimate questions. So we got to watch it. I can be a crabby, dismissive guy, and I get tired of hearing the same question 20 times over, but I got to stop that, because the person asking is genuinely concerned. So when they say, how are you going to possibly make it when you're landlocked? You always hear that one. You say, yes, we'd be like Switzerland with oil. See, again, you don't have to be as sarcastic as I was with it, but there's a point to that, right? Like, we can make a point, and we have to study some of these points so we can politely answer those legitimate questions. If coastal access and oil alone were a recipe for riches, Venezuela would be one of the richest places on the planet. They ate their zoo animals, and they had all the oil they could possibly consume, but it tastes terrible. Meanwhile, Switzerland, Austria, they're doing very well. You know, how can we possibly have a relationship post-independence? Well, again, not everybody is a geek like me and reads on that. But a lot of people forget Sweden and Norway were one country. Back actually the year that Alberta was founded, they held a referendum and they split. And look at them now. They're two small nations, mostly resource-based. They don't have passports between the two countries, but they are two distinct countries with sovereignty, closest of friends. You know, one's a little more socialist than the other, but they're still freedom-loving, they're peaceful. This can happen. It has happened. The Velvet Revolution, Slovakia, the Czech Republic. Borders change. It's nothing new. Countries aren't immutable. But emotions are real too. And a person's connection to the concept of Canada is strong. And we have to make that case to make people realize that Canada won't end when a province becomes independent. It's just the contract will. Newfoundland's still going to be there. Quebec's still going to be there. Our friends in some of them are in Toronto are still there. But we've got a different agreement. But it takes time. It takes multiple conversations. It takes tact. It takes planning. You can't get in somebody's face, particularly when it's something emotional. Somebody gets in your face, something you feel connected about, says, you've got to stop doing that. Most of you, well, we're Albertans, this or the other ones. They're going to dig their heels in and tell you to get stuffed. So then you're not accomplishing what you want to, because we want to think tactically. We want to actually get up and think, can I create more supporters for a yes vote today? What can I do to do it, whether it's on my social media, whether it's at the bar. I mean, you don't have to wrap your life around it, but these are things that we can do as we go along. Because we worry about parties, groups, leaders, and they're important, but they come and go, they split. But if it's a network of individuals, that will never break. If that group blows up and disappears, it doesn't matter because the movement's still there. Another group will fill the void. If that party comes and goes, same thing. I guess you could almost say unorganized but individuals moving in the same direction are much, much harder to stop. You know, what's scarier coming at you? You know, a single hornet you can swat out, or a whole bunch of ants coming into the thousands. You know, I mean, the hornet's scary, but you'll never stop all those ants. So I just, want to get up there, and it's great. This is the room of the converted. Everybody here knows they want to go. They know that the system's not working. They're ready to roll. But we've got another 20% to gain. So this is the seed. We got to leave these rooms and get out and see how we can make this grow. Because it feels like it's going to be a long time, say, to get into 2026 in spring, where I'm guessing, and I could be dead wrong, as I said, I make a lot of mistakes, but the referendum might be held by then. It seems like a long time, but that's going to go fast. And we've got to use our time as effectively as possible. And groups and others are going to be integral. The Alberta Prosperity Project is far and above the most well-organized, got it together, some fantastic people, great resource on their website to point people towards that. If you don't have the answer to a question, look it up. And they've got a great Q&A on there, things like that. And don't be afraid if a person asks you a question and you don't know the answer to say, I don't know. Let's have a coffee next week. I'll have the answer by then. Because people hate a BSer. Don't make it up. I'm being serious, we can say, I don't know. It's honesty. That's what I mean what wins people. It's trust. It's knowing it's one-on-one. This person's not trying to feed me a line. They're genuinely trying to feed me something good. Either way, I'm using my stopwatch because I know you've been patiently sitting and bladders are filling. So I look forward to the questions and answers and the other speaker. I thank you for your time, and I'm very excited. I really am. Decades of this, but we have events and an opportunity like I've never seen in my lifetime, and I really think we're going to get it over the line. But it's up to us. Thank you.
I'm inspired to be knocking on doors after that, Cory. I tell you, that's, hey, absolutely, fellas. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce my good friend, Danny Hozack. Danny and I have shared the stage on a number of independence discussions throughout the province over the last couple of years, and past chair of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. Alberta Beef Producers, okay, no, about as passionate an Albertan as all of us up on the stage here. So, Danny, please welcome Danny Hozack.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for taking time out of your busy days to help us chart the pathway to sovereignty. I think I'm going to follow Dennis's lead, and I'm going to digress before I start. I liked Link's comments about a 51st state, and I'm not necessarily opposed to a 51st state, but I sure as hell don't want to be in a 51st state with the rest of Canada in it. So that's why I'm here today. I want to be darn sure we need to have our own country first. I think Dennis started by thanking Quebec, and I want to thank Quebec too, because as quite a few people have mentioned, the Clarity Act, the citizens of Quebec went to the federal government and asked them to set the rules for leaving the country. And they came back with the Clarity Act, which was a clear question and a clear majority. And like, do you think for 1 second if Alberta would have asked them to set those rules, if they would have done it? But you can be sure that Quebec got their way when they did that. Because did anyone ever think, like in the Clarity Act, why doesn't it just say, if you want to leave the country, fill in the form? We, this province, put in your name, want to leave the country, and you have to have 50% plus one if you want to leave. Well, the reason they didn't put that in is because you can be darn sure is that there's two sets of rules. If Quebec wants to leave, it's 50% plus one person. But right now, here we are, we're talking about leaving, and even my dear friend Michael at one point said, well, if you're actually leaving the country, Alberta would have to have 60% or maybe even 66%. And I was listening to a fellow on the Sean Newman podcast the other day, and he said, well, it couldn't just be 60% of the people who vote. It would have to be 60% of all the citizens. So there you go again. Like, they've got two sets of rules, one for them and one for us. So that's why we're here today. We want to talk about the Clarity Act. And the other thing, if you look at it, I was looking up some stuff. In 2000 and, no, I think it was in 92, the Liberals won with 42% of the vote. In 96, they won with 43% of the vote. In not the last election, but the second last election, the Liberals had 32%. The Conservatives actually had 33%, but because the Liberals were the sitting government, they got to form the government by forming the coalition by promising more money from Alberta. So if we do the math right, over the last 30 or 35 years, we've been ruled by a government that had approximately 40% support, and they have voted approximately $1 trillion or maybe $1.5 trillion out of our pocketbooks. So when people say, oh, it'll have to be more than 50%, tell them, yeah, it'll have to be more than 50%, all right. It'll have to be 50% plus one. So let's not let them BS us on that. The first thing, now I'm going to get, thank you. Now I'm going to get back to my notes, and I think like the most important thing we can do, and pretty much everybody's touched on it, I want to thank, besides thanking Quebec, I want to thank Premier Smith for actually saying she would have a referendum. And now I think, exactly, I think we have to appreciate that. And I think what we all need to do is focus on helping Dennis and his team get both the signatures of intent, and then, once we've got enough signatures of intent to actually get the referendum signatures, actually get the question. I think they're working on the question right now. You have the question, yes, exactly. You have the question already, and so we all need to work together. I certainly agree with the other speakers saying we all need to sort of put some of our past differences behind us and all work together to both get the referendum into place and then to win the referendum. And the other thing that we're all going to have to work together is to defend each other as it unfolds, because you can be sure there's a lot of vested interests, including some of our federal Conservatives who do not want this to happen, and we will see a backlash against the people who are promoting separatism like we haven't seen in many of our lifetimes. And so I think we'll have to be ready. We'll have to work at that. We'll have to have a united mission. I like to talk about Cory's book, Michael's books. As Todd said, I was actually on the Alberta Beef Producers. We used to be called the Alberta Cattle Commission, and when I was there, our big battle was what we called the crow rate. We were finally we were actually the West was being hurt by the crow rate because, as you said, we were paying more freight one way and less freight another way, and it was just a bunch of BS. But finally, Jean-Luc Pépin came along, and he said he put in a few $1 billion to have the issue settled. And basically the big players were the grain companies, the railways, and our little group called the Alberta Beef Producers. But at the end of the day, we got our share of that money, and we got it changed in a way that was good for the West. And the reason we did because I think our mentor at the time, his name was Chris Mills, he basically had taken like a small army of us young men and young farmers and one thing or another, some of whom didn't have a grade 9 education, and he had them so well versed in the issues that they were quite capable of debating with the politicians, the bureaucrats, the president. Like they could debate with the presidents of CN or CP or the president of SaskPool, which was the big defender of the status quo. So I'm all for having a well-informed small army of people. And I think if you're really if you really are interested in having, and I trust you are because you hear it, but I mean, like, I think you're going to have to look at it seriously and think, like, when people tell me they're not interested in politics, I always say, well, my grandpa wasn't interested in war either, but he still went twice. And so I think if we really want to end up with an independent Alberta sometime in the next 2 or 3 years, everybody's going to have to get these books. They're going to have to read them. They're going to have to understand them. They're going to have to buy them and give them to their friends. They're going to have to share them so that every one of us is able to talk to, as you pointed out, the last speaker, I guess it was you, Cory, like you need to be well enough informed that you can talk to your friends and neighbors and even people you don't know about what these issues are. And to me, it's going to be quite a challenge. But I think to win it, we're all going to have to make it a line item in our budgeting of time, and we're going to have to make it a line item in our budgeting of money and resources. I mean, we're fighting an establishment. Like I say, we have a volunteer army fighting an establishment that's fighting us with our money. So I mean, we're not only sending the money to Ottawa to finance them, they're fighting us, and we're having bake sales to fight back. So it's going to be a tough battle. When Danielle says she wants to have, she's not really in favor of independence. She'd like to have a sovereign, what's it called, a sovereign province in a united country. I said, like, that's as stupid as to me as saying, like, you know, my wife got the house in my divorce, but I've made a deal. She's made a deal, said that me and my new wife can live in the granny suite as long as I pay the mortgage. I say, well, I don't see that working out very well. You know what I mean? And so, like, to me, what she's talking about is just flat out insane to talk about, you know, a sovereign province in a united country. It's not going to work. But again, one of the things that she is good at, and if for any of you who follow Victor Davis Hanson out of the States, he said we are increasingly being led by people who have never studied anything in their life except how to get elected. And I think if you think about it, that's what's happening. And like Jason Kenney came along, made a big, you know, campaigned over doing something about equalization, didn't do anything for 2 years. Then, by his own admission, stayed up all night the night before the UCP annual meeting to write a speech about what he should do. And what did he do? He created the Fair Deal panel and said, oh, I've created a panel of people to go around and ask the province if they still want me to do what I promised to do when they elected me 2 years ago. So after spending, like, you know, what is it, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 million, another year of our time on the thing, we finally, they said we should have a referendum. We had a referendum. We voted 62% in favor of doing something about equalization. He wrote 2 really stern, letters to Quebec and then to Ottawa, and then changed the subject. If you're worried about how I was going to say, I thought I forgot to start my timer, but I did start it, so I know how much time I've got left. So, but one of the things I really admire Cory. I listen to his stuff as often as I can, and the other day he mentioned it again today. Don't worry about the independence parties, and I really appreciate the fact. I think the least, like you said, some not very nice things about some of the parties, but our Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition, you just mentioned we were around it. I appreciated that because I'm with the Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition. They didn't say anything bad about us, and I appreciate that. But when in 2012, how many people here remember Kevin Avram and the Canadian? He was the original founder of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. In 2012, a group of us Wild Rose candidates hired him, and we created what was called the Wild Rose Coffee Room. We had 14 candidates in it. Strankman was in it. Drew Barnes was in it. Quite a few of us were there. At the end of the day, we elected 7 out of the 14 of us that were in the Wild Rose Coffee Room. But he said to us, he said, when you look at it, he said, Alberta actually became an NDP province long before they elected Rachel Notley. And one of the reasons they did was from 1967 till about 2012 when the Wild Rose came along, there was the only opposition was always socialist opposition. There was never anybody that got up with a conservative suggestion to fix the government. It was always a socialist suggestion, as you can imagine, you know, well reported by the mainstream media who loved their socialist ideas. Of course, the bureaucrats never complained about them either. So we went for years without ever having like any conservative opposition. And the best example that I have of that is when Stephen Harper got elected. To his credit, he came out with that $200 per child for parents. So a mother with 3 young kids would be getting $600. In the next provincial election, Ed Stelmach was running, and daycare became one of the issues. Well, one of his big daily announcements was they were going to create 29,000 publicly funded daycare positions. I phoned our MLA, President of Treasury Board, Lloyd Snellgrove, and I said, Lloyd, publicly funded daycare is a socialist idea from day one. I said, why didn't you agree to match the $200 per child of that Stephen Harper put out? And he said, yeah, I wish we'd have thought of that. And I said, yeah, so do I. But I mean, the point I'm making is, like, good governance, like we need somebody on the right. And, and as I say, I think you introduced me as the chairman of the Economic Education Association, but I'm also the president of the Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition. So, like, I actually believe that it's good for our province to have strong opposition and to have some opposition that's actually presenting conservative suggestions. The other thing that I didn't used to be a believer in, but it's recall. And Paul Himon, our Wild Rose leader, has made a real believer in me of that. And like, none of us in our private life would hire someone and say, well, if you show up on Monday, I'll give you a company credit card and a company vehicle, and your next job review will be in 4 years, whether you show up for work or whether you don't. Like, it's almost laughable. It's so stupid. And yet we go on and you say, oh, we should be able to fire them. You say, oh, you wouldn't want to fire them. Of course, who's saying you wouldn't want to fire them? Well, it's only them. You know what I mean? Because like we it's just insane that we don't do that. And I talked to Danielle about this before the Lethbridge by-election, and she said, oh, didn't you hear at our annual meeting we passed a resolution to bring in recall? And I said, Danielle, I haven't got time to tell you all the motions that we passed at a political meeting that nobody ever did anything with it, once they got elected. So our Wild Rose position on recall is if 50% plus one of the actual number of voters in your area sign a petition, you'll step down and run for in a by-election. And so then you don't need legislation. All you need is the word of the person who's running. So one of my suggestions to sort of make things get better is don't vote for anybody in the future that hasn't agreed to be recalled. That like I say, you wouldn't hire somebody that you couldn't fire. Why do we do it with our politicians? So make them agree just on a personal basis. Like, you don't need legislation. You can just have them say, I give you my word. If 50% of you take up a thing, you can fire me. So anyway, I'm as Vince would say, I'm getting close to the conclusion. And so I think the most important thing that we can come away from here today is Dennis's initiative with the signatures. Like, now that we're heading down this road, we have to get the signatures. Then we have to figure out a way to get the petitions around, get them signed, get them back there. But as we're collecting the signatures, and I think everybody should help them do that, but as we're collecting the signatures, I think we can expect to start, having more and more incoming flack to all of us that are involved in this process. So we have to, I think we have to, for one thing, we have to sort of prepare ourselves in our mind for how much flack we're going to take. Like, don't think for 1 second, don't think for 1 second that they're just going to say, oh, like one of your kids that's moving out, oh, good, good luck. If you need any help with a down payment on a new house or something, we'll help you with it. They're not going to be saying that to us. Like, their whole livelihood is at stake. And I don't know how many of you have heard of Martin Armstrong, but he's a sort of a world famous prognosticator. He was speaking in Calgary last Saturday, and he said, Alberta will be an independent country in the next few years, and he's called a lot of things right. Look up his name. I won't tell you what he said the rest of Canada would end up being, but it wasn't good. And so, but I guess they can find out on their own. I don't have to tell them that. So anyway, here we are today. The Liberals have just won. How many times have the Liberals won an election by pitting, like promising the rest of Canada that they would attack our energy resources, our energy resources and our agriculture industry. They keep calling the climate hoax. They keep calling it a real national emergency or a worldwide emergency. Like we have been lied to them by for so long, it's hard to believe. But again, like I say, this is the third time in my lifetime that a Trudeau-led government has threatened to undermine a generation of our hopes and dreams and the wealth that we've created in this country. So I think we all have to be prepared to push back on that. And I was just talking to this lady. I'm sorry I don't know your name. We were talking about her grandson, and he was thinking that he wouldn't go to medical school because he was so worried about how the future is. And we actually went and listened to Jordan Peterson on the 12th of February in Calgary, and it was really a pretty interesting thing. We followed him. I think we all followed Jordan Peterson, but there was about 5,400 people there in the Saddle Dome, and I would say half of them were 40 years or older or younger. And at the end, he said, and I took it he was talking to the young people. He said, there's nobody in the old folks' home that is worrying about some of the mistakes they made in their life. Like he said, it doesn't matter whether you lost your farm or your business or whatever. He said, the people in the old folks' home aren't worried about that. He said, the only thing they're worried about is the things they didn't do. And so this is my message. I mean, we're still, we're obviously in the fight because we're here, but I think the message of hope that we have to have for our kids and our children was say, here's your chance. It's been a good thing. It's been a good thing for Alberta. It's been a good life for all of us. And it always used to bug me. The left have mocked Alberta and our tar sands for years, and by calling it the tar sands, of course. And for about 10 or 15 million years, it was the tar sands. And then some young guys, I always say, with their old half-tons and their young wives, went to Fort McMurray, and they figured out how to get tar out of sand, you know what I mean? And now it's one of the miracles of the modern world. And again, when you're talking about being a 51st state, I think we'd be in the G15, we'd certainly be in the G20 as a country. And I'm not actually in favor of having one big country either, because again, it's my hatred for big government. But if if we joined all the Western provinces together, somebody would want to have a federal government. And so I would sooner just have 3 or 4 small countries. When we were going to Washington, we could call Saskatchewan and say, look, we're going to Washington to sell beef and oil. Do you want to come along to sell potash and uranium? And my guess is they would come, and they'd probably be smart enough to say, well, can we share the room bill? You know what I mean? That'd be fine by me. So anyway, let's just, I thank you very much for being here. I'm absolutely convinced, and I'm almost ready to close, but I've got a minute and 30 seconds left and how many people know who led the first expedition to the top of Mount Everest? Anybody know the fellow's name? Tenzing. Well, you're close. Somebody said Tenzing. He was the Sherpa. The other, Edmund Hillary was the other name. The fellow, it's actually a trick question, but the fellow who actually led the expedition, his name was William Hunt, and the reason. And he was in the Second World War, and he was but in any event, he led the expedition. And the reason everyone had always failed before was it was always a rich guy who wanted to get to the top of Mount Everest. So he would save up his money, he'd hire a bunch of people, and they'd head for Mount Everest. And when he ran out of oxygen, they'd all come home a failure. And the reason William Hunt succeeded when no one else did was he said to his team when they were leaving, he said, when we can see the summit, whoever's most able to go forward, that's who will go forward. So that's how he scaled a mountain that had never been scaled before. And when you look at the challenge ahead of us, I would say going to Mount Everest is fairly easy compared to what we're up against. But I think one of the things I've seen today is a whole group of people that don't actually care who gets the credit. They just want somebody to get to the top of this, like we want an independence thing. So anyway, Todd, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate having this time, and I'm certainly ready to answer questions if anybody has any. Thank you very much.
I think we should take 10 minutes for a bathroom break, if you folks would like to do that. But please do come back. We're going to talk about economic union versus political union and the implications to our households. And then we're going to have Q&A where you can ask questions of the panel, and you'll get some expert answers. So let's take a 10-minute break. Well, thanks for coming back, folks. This next half, I'm sorry, not half. I promise you we're not going to do that. yeah, okay. This next part, quite frankly, we want to get to Q&A, and I'm sure a lot of you folks, but much of this has been thought-provoking. I just want to say this again. Everything that we're doing is laying the foundation for such a glorious future and inheritance for our children and our grandchildren. This is a lot closer than people think. I mean, we are going to have a vote. That is absolutely clear. There's going to be one, and it's as the fellows up here that are so knowledgeable have talked about. The obligation I think that we all have as a society is to put the winning conditions in place. That we want to win that referendum, and you know why? Because frankly, it's the right thing to do. When it's all said and done, this is about those who come next. And when we're at 38% right now, and polls are showing that 51% of the people of Alberta are asking the government to draft conditions as to what this might look like, and we just started this, I'm pretty darned encouraged. Well, let's talk about what if. Well, this is one of the things that I get excited about when I think about the implications of an independent nation. I'll say it again. I mean, my Alberta separation, it's not just Alberta, it's Saskatchewan. Guaranteed if we go, they're coming with us. And in fact, their independence movement, although Mo hasn't agreed to give the people a vote, guaranteed that won't be far behind because he's not going to have a choice. They're ahead of us in the polls in terms of their willingness and their wanting to ultimately separate. So it's our brothers and sisters next door in Saskatchewan and Alberta, and I guarantee if that happens, there's a very high likelihood that Manitoba will come. We'll get Churchill. As I say, they didn't want to be part of it in the first place. They were forced into Confederation at gunpoint. If that happens, pretty high likelihood the North is coming, both Nunavut and the Yukon, and I think that if that happens, Northern British Columbia, they're already organizing for an independence vote. So all of this is being kicked off because of the leadership that Danielle Smith has ultimately allowed us to go forward with the predictability that we're going to have a vote. Well, there's been some discussions in terms of what the Clarity Act means, and I think the fellows did a really good job. This is just simple, a clear question, a clear answer, 50 plus 1%, sorry, it's done. Then it comes down to we need to negotiate the terms of the divorce. Well, what about our debt? Well, here, what about First Nations? What about our defense obligations? What about our treaty obligations? And on and on and on. Well, I believe, and this is stepping forward, and this is a bit amusing, so forgive me, this is me doing the talking. You've heard a lot of people in Western, or in Alberta, talk about the 51st state. Well, that appeals to a lot of people, and I get it. I mean, I just got back from New Orleans a couple of days ago, and I filled up a big SUV for $25. Well, I tell you what, there's something pretty darned appealing with an entrepreneurial society versus a socialist society verging on the basis of communism. I don't think we need political union with the United States. I think simply economic union gives us everything that we might want. If we were to simply adopt the US dollar, our household debt would instantly decrease by 30%. If we were to adopt the US dollar, our household value, our household assets would instantly increase by 30%. Our debt, and make no mistake, when we negotiate terms of divorce, we are going to have to accept our portion of debt. But guess what? It's going to be proportional debt. Manitoba East, you voted for it, you can choke on it. So we accept wholeheartedly our per capita debt, but we pay in that in US dollars. We are now instantly the new best friend of the most powerful nation on earth, the most entrepreneurial nation on earth. All tariffs instantly evaporate. Defense, we keep the Patricias. We keep the Strathconas. We keep the Fort Garry Horse. But at the end of the day, we say to the United States, We are going to take 3% of our GDP and we're going to abrogate our defense to you. Our security is ironclad. There will never be anyone who will threaten us going forward. We don't need political union. We don't need to become the 51st state if we simply consider a strategy of adopting the US dollar. I'm adamant about this, that I believe that our movement must create a white paper. I said earlier that if we look at the Scottish independence run, it was about the most credible thing in the world. They weren't yelling and screaming at each other. They were just simply saying it's time to go. And there was some skullduggery that went on behind the scenes. They were so close. But what they did was they commissioned a white paper which all of the questions that are reasonable questions were answered, and in a book, just like that one right there, that when you sat there, and it would be delivered to every mailbox in this province. And it would simply, what about debt? I'm having my coffee in the morning, you flip the page, there it is, expert answers from reasonable questions. And every question that is important to all of us are in black and white, beyond reproach, and answers given by experts, be it economists, be it societal, be it whatever it needs to be, but a white paper so that when we get to this point of a vote, people can say, they can adjudicate what's in my best interest, what's in my household's best interest, and they will vote from a position of knowledge. A lot of this crap that's going on, oh, you can't go, you're landlocked. Well, last I checked, anybody that wants to come from the West Coast to the East Coast, they got to come through Alberta. Anybody wants to go from the East Coast to the West Coast, they have to come through Alberta. So as far as I'm concerned, if anybody ever tried that, well, right back at you. Guaranteed that is a moot point. First Nations, no one's talking about abrogating First Nations rights or treaty rights. Not at all. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I would like the West. This is me talking. I think the Commonwealth is some of the best things that we've ever had in our nation. It's Quebec that has abrogated our relationship with the Crown. Well, I think that we need to consider, do we want to continue to be part of the Commonwealth? I personally would say yes to that. And treaty rights, with the wealth that we would create, $244 billion we sent to Quebec and Ontario and the Maritimes for nothing. Imagine if we kept that money. In a very short period of time, we would be debt-free with that, and with a sovereign wealth fund that would rival Norway. Norway doesn't pay personal income tax. Norway has free education. Norway has some of the best health care in the world by far. Norway's pension plan and the societal investments for the weakest members are some of the very best on the planet. That's what we can become. That is what we will become. We just have to have the courage to stand up and say, we need a new day. We need to leave something much more valuable for those that come next, much more predictable, and an inheritance that we can be proud of. I don't want to look back when it's my time and I'm closer to the other side than coming in on the front end. I don't want to look back 10, 15, 20 years from now and think, God, I could have done something. In knowing that I've left this constitutional mess for yet another generation. Gentlemen, it's been my honor to share the stage with you today. I think that some of the words and some of the thought-provoking conversations that you've had has been just absolutely amazing. And what I'd like to do, I've got my friend, this is Dave. Dave's got the mic, and if anybody's got questions, please just raise your hand. Dave will come on over, and you can address the question to. Oh, we got mics right there too. You can address questions to whoever you might want to address them to. What I thought we would do, though, if everybody's okay with this, is that the answer would come from who the question is being addressed to, but we'd also give the panel the opportunity, if they want to add something to it or whatever they might want to comment on, we'd give them that okay to do it. So, LeVar, over to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Todd. Oh, I guess it's working. I have a question for Dr. Modry. The Alberta Prosperity Project is an educational organization, and as I understand, I believe there have been a lot of people concerned about issues that have come up today, and I'm wondering, do you have some Q&A answers on your system?
Yeah, good question. We've been at this for a few years now. We've given hundreds of presentations, podcasts. On the website, where there's an FAQ section, so if you look at the taskbar at the top, you'll see various headings, education, etc. In the FAQ, frequently asked questions section, we've answered about 71 questions, some of the most important questions that are relevant to that people might be concerned about. And just to give you an example of one of them, I can address the majority of them anyhow, because we've been doing it for so long. But on the issue of being landlocked, there's a little bit more to add. For example, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, Articles 124 and 125, give the right of landlocked countries such as Switzerland or Austria both access to tidewater and access along land as well for the transport of goods and services. Notwithstanding that, the majority of our trade, 90% plus, goes south. But as Todd did indicate, we're really policy locked. We're not landlocked, we're policy locked. And like he said, we're not, as a sovereign nation, we wouldn't be without clout, because we could block transfer of goods and services across our borders east and west, either tariff, add a 30% or 50% tariff on anything that's going back and forth, or in fact we could block it altogether. It wouldn't be in the interest of the rest of Canada to embargo Alberta. We very strongly believe that saner minds will prevail in these sorts of discussions. Thank you, LeVar. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Don't go anywhere, Dennis. Alberta Prosperity Project. You alluded during your speech, very small, on the question. What is the question? What does it look like?
All right. That's a good question as well. I'm not sure if everybody has recognized that we've released the sovereignty question publicly already. But the question was drafted by two constitutional lawyers, one of them Jeff Rath, who's general counsel for the Alberta Prosperity Society. And the question goes like this. Do you agree that the province of Alberta shall become a sovereign country and cease to be a province of Canada? That question follows the exact terminology in the Clarity Act. So it should be a question that will be approved by Elections Alberta when it is submitted. And with respect to the petition, the actual gathering of the signatures, well, as a consequence of everything that we're doing, we have right now somewhere around 15,000 volunteers. So we expect that there will be no problem gathering the signatures within a 120-day period, should it be the case that the new threshold of 177,000 is proclaimed into law in June. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Dave will bring the mic over, Kathy.
I'm already heading that direction. So I have two questions for the panel, so which one wants to answer? Can you hear me now? Okay. So I have two questions, and they're for the panel, so whoever is wanting to answer it would be great. So name the 5 best reasons as to why we need to become an independent society.
Well, here I vowed to be brief with my answers, and you've fired a big loaded one to me here. The 5 best reasons for an independent West. I don't know if I can do it in a countdown, but a number that hits me: renewal. renewal. We're in an obsolete system. That's one of the things I didn't touch upon when I spoke earlier. We got to remember too, it's not the party in charge that's broken, it's the system that's broken. And as long as people think it's the party, that's another mistake we'll keep making on the federal front and throwing more parties in there while the system stays the same. So we've got an opportunity because we've got a system that was created 100 and some years ago, a system that was meant to ease us out of basically the feudal system. So what was superior to that is not a modern system that respects freedom, that respects ambition, that respects personal rights. So I'll just kind of leave it at that, because if I start listing all 5, we could be here much, much longer. But if we get a proper system, a proper constitution that does protect all of those important freedoms, rights, and abilities, it will cover all of the other reasons people have to want to go. But we need a new system if we want to have any of those things.
Thank you.
Okay, the first very simple reason, and I've cited this already, is to get out from under the oppressive regulations and taxation of the federal government. That's one thing. But I want to remind you of what we're facing as well as a reason. As Mr. Carney has pointed out, the way in which he wants to deal with what he said is that Western civilization is morally corrupt, and capitalism is the root cause of it, then his solution is to restrict personal freedoms, to restrict business, to restrict agriculture, and to restrict the financing of companies that are not following environmental, social, and governance dictates. In other words, because of climate change. So I would add to that another important reason, I believe, is the issue of values. And I think the values of Mr. Carney with respect to the oppression of individuals, the inability that the perspective that he has on restricting our freedoms, I think, and our prosperity are critically important. There's a movement to remove family as the center or as the pillar of society, to pass off to your children and your children's children, self-reliance, wisdom, values. There's a movement that way. There's a movement to restrict, particularly in Quebec right now, we're seeing the restriction of religious freedom as well. So these are some of the important reasons that I think are critically important for us. But at the end of the day, what Cory just said, when you can't change the system, then what do? You have to leave. It's just like a failed marriage.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Jordan Peterson said Justin Trudeau is just an incompetent buffoon. But he said Mark Carney is actually an evil person. And I mean, he is all in on, carbon net zero and like carbon net zero, if you think about it, here we are, fat and happy in one of the wealthiest food-producing regions in the world, and carbon net zero. What we're actually talking about is starving someone to death in a developing country. So, like, don't fool yourself. Like, you're not talking about helping the environment or any of this bullshit. When you're talking about carbon net zero, like our premier often does, you're talking about starving somebody to death in a poor country. And I don't think God gave us all the resources we've got so that we can let somebody starve to death in a poor country while we're fat and happy. So, like, I mean, to me, this just doesn't make any sense to be in a country that has the same values as Mark Carney does.
Amen.
I just wanted to add one word response: hope.
Yes. Perfect.
It's all well and good. My mom used to say to Dad that it's easy to criticize, but if you don't have a solution you're better off to just shut your trap. And that's what, so I think you bring up an excellent question. I think it's actually something that we need to work on, is the vision of this new Alberta. But I think we have it. We just haven't, we're still working on it, and we have to be open to the possibilities. But our young people look at what's going on and they are without hope. We have to bring them hope. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, I'd add one more thing, so when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister, there was a point in time when he was talking about Canada becoming or being an energy superpower. Anybody remember that? Hands up. Yep. Remember what happened to our dollar when he was talking that way? Anybody? $1.05. Remember what was happening in the press at that time? Anybody? Quebec and Ontario lost their minds. We can't compete with $1.05. We rely on a subpar dollar with the United States for our economies to be able to export. Our values, our societal goals, everything in terms of our economy, we are diametrically opposed to the Eastern requirements. We're entrepreneurial. We're conservatives. I mean, we had this abomination of a Notley government, but that was a protest vote. That's the only way I'm looking at that. They're socialists voting on communism. They love their socialism. We don't. And if we thrive and our dollar goes above $1.05, they don't. And they know it, and that's why they ultimately vote against us. Time and time and time and time and time and time again, since the very beginning.
Thank you. So the next question I have is not if we separate, but when we do. What happens to our Crown land, like Banff and Jasper? Do they come with us? Yes. Yes?
It's attached. It isn't going anywhere.
Awesome.
You know what? When we talk about the terms of divorce, well, guess what, guys? We're gonna negotiate Banff. We're gonna negotiate Jasper, and no, it's not staying with Ottawa. And at the end of the day, that'll be part of our discussions. Yep. No. No. Go ahead.
We sort of touched on this, and that's the Indian reserves, which are also Crown land, as you know. Mm-hmm. And our Wild Rose policy is that if we vote to leave, well, then the First Nations will have to have another vote because they are still on federal government land inside our country. So we will ask them to have another vote, and they can have a vote, and if they want, they can stay on their Crown land inside the country. You know what I mean? Yeah. That'll be their choice. But if they vote to come with us, well, then we'll put a price on the Crown land. Let's just say it's worth $100 billion for all the land on the reserves. We all agree that, of course, the rest of Canada doesn't necessarily agree, but we all agree that the rest of Canada owes us somewhere around $650 to $1 trillion. So let's just say it's 650, and the reserve land is worth $100 billion. So we'll say, look, we'll just, if you want to stay, that's fine. We'll buy the Crown land. We'll tell the rest of Canada, you don't owe us $650 billion anymore. You only owe us $550 billion, and we're keeping the Crown land. And then we will say to the reserves, like, you have two choices. Like, every single reserve can make this decision on their own. Like, they can either come with us, and if they come with us, well, then we'll buy the land, and they can either run it like a Hutterite colony, or they can take the number of acres on the reserve and they can divide it by the number of people and give everybody a certificate of ownership for their share of the Crown land. And my guess is they'll be quite excited about that, because for the first time in their lifetime, for the first time in our lifetime, they will actually be citizens like us living on their own land. There will be some challenges with that, but my guess is that the majority of them would vote to come with us.
Thank you.
And we'd give $20 billion for those two parks too. Like Banff and Jasper, we could take another $10 billion off what they owe us for them.
Okay, we've got a question here.
This question goes to anybody that wants to answer. What's the plan B? Plan A looks pretty good, but what's plan B?
Plan A, B, C, D, and forever is we will win this the first time around. We can't lose it.
We're living in Plan B.
Two questions, but the first is, what is the process and who is responsible for writing up our Constitution? And what's the status of it now?
Yeah, please do, Dennis.
Okay. As I said earlier, we've thought through just about everything. We've already drafted an interim constitution. So on day one, the provincial government, which becomes ostensibly a sovereign Alberta government, has an interim constitution that they can work with. And then over the course of the next 6 or 12 months, there will be a constitutional conference in which a full constitution is drafted, and I might say that would include First Nations having constitutionalized, for example, the revenue sharing of the development and transport of our natural resources. But that is the idea, to have a constitutional conference, come up with a constitution, and maybe more than one option, and then put it to the public for a vote as to which constitution and form of government you wish to have. That is the plan.
So Westminster versus Republic. That's
Okay.
all, yeah.
Well, that's another good question. And if you think about it, and if you've read anything on our website, what we are actually suggesting is that the easiest thing to do is to move from Alberta as a province within the Commonwealth to move from a province to a country, a sovereign country within the Commonwealth. Now, there are 56 Commonwealth countries, and 36 of them are constitutional republics. So in this decision-making as to what form of governance within the Commonwealth, we could very well become a constitutional republic, very much like the U.S., but actually the interim constitution that we're proposing, and Scott right here could even add to my comment, there's even an extra level of accountability built in. So we feel really very good about it, and it's a great question, and thank you for that question. Scott, you might want to add to. Did you have another question?
Yes, I do, but there's someone behind you there.
Oh, sorry.
Well, thank you. Dennis, I actually haven't looked at the Constitution you have on your website, but as you know, you... Oh, it's not on there, okay. Well, sure. Well, as you know, you and I and about 40 other people spent a weekend in Lloydminster. I've lost track of how long ago that was, but the fellow that sort of coordinated that meeting, his name was Dale Wells, and he used to be, he used to be on Twitter under serious about leaving. But in any event, at the end of that weekend, we came up with a draft constitution that, I think Art, you were there too, if I'm not mistaken. You were there that weekend, and like I say, we had about 40 or 50 people there. At the end of that, we drafted, like this is a constitution would get a small country by for quite a while. You know what I mean? And so, I don't think it's possible to actually calculate how much work Dennis, myself, some of these people in the table have actually done on this already. It's sort of like growing bamboo. Like they say it takes 25 years to become an overnight success. Well, some of this movement has been going on for about 20 years, and so a lot of the work is done. It's a matter of bringing it to fruition as the momentum builds.
Thank you. My second question was, I and quite a few people that I know believe that the key difference between us and Eastern Canada is not around the oil sands. It's around values. Values that we are capitalist. They are not. I'm going by voting. We are libertarian. They are not. We are Christian, or at least family valued. They are not. That's voting pattern shows that. I hope the Constitution does too. That's all I want to say.
So we've been, as you said, 25 years, well, it's been longer than that because I'm a little older than 25, have been talking about separation, independence, and it's ideological. We need numbers. What I get asked all of the time is about my pension. What does it mean to me personally? How much is it going to cost for Canada to have its own police force? Cory, I read your book and I totally agree. We need to start pushing forward with our own pension plan, with our own police force, and start declaring some independence ahead of an independence vote. So people have a real world idea of what they're going to, what they can expect. My mother is in her 80s and her friends are all asking how much would their pension change. We don't have those numbers at this point in time. We haven't gotten those numbers from CPP at this point. We don't know how much a police force would cost, nor do we know how much it would cost to gain that independence. And they're worried. They're honestly worried. So I would like to, when I talk to them, be able to give them these numbers. Is that something we're close to?
I'll respond, and then Dennis probably wants to respond as well. I'm just going to give you what Danielle Smith has said. And she has said that regardless of the talks, Alberta premiums for an Alberta pension plan will be the same or lower, guaranteed. Yes, they're still in negotiations, but that's a guarantee. And when it comes to the benefits, they will either be the same as the Canada pension plan or higher, guaranteed. That's from the Premier.
Yeah, really good, really great question. So let's put this in context. The circumstances are now that if you take the pension plan, we give $9 billion to Ottawa, and we get back $6 billion. Okay, sitting in the pension plan, funds for Alberta, according to the Lightworks report, is about $370 billion when you add in the interest and the amount that we've contributed the last couple of years. That should come back to Alberta. Understand as well that every year we are giving about $70 billion to Ottawa through all forms of taxation, for which we get back 27. So imagine if we have that additional 33. That can supplement the pension plan, and as was just stated by Vince, it could actually improve quite significantly as well. It doesn't matter for also, if Alberta is a sovereign nation, remember everybody in this room is still a Canadian citizen, right? But you can also become an Alberta citizen, i.e. there are many people who have dual citizenship. And what's really important to understand here, which I think is very persuasive in terms of benefit for people, is that you can have one person here who's a Canadian citizen and another person here who wants to retain their Canadian citizenship and pay taxes according to Canadian tax law. But you have another person who's a dual citizen as well, but makes the choice to pay Alberta tax law. The difference is massive. The person who lives in Alberta is going to pay less than 50% of the amount of taxes that the person who wants to pay taxes to Canada as well. So it's just something to think about. No, I don't know if that sufficiently answered your question.
Yeah, I think what I'm probably looking for is numbers. So if people are asking, how is it going to affect them, their own economic situation? The retirees want to know what their pension is going to be. I know Canada Pension Plan has said we're out to lunch with what our figures are, but haven't given us a figure. They want to know what it's actually going to cost to have our own police force, which we should have, just like Quebec and Ontario have.
Well, remember, we're paying for it now.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's what they want to do, is have that breakdown.
Yeah.
Is that breakdown on the APP side? I haven't seen it.
It's answered in the Q&A to an extent.
Okay.
There's, you can certainly look there. I was going to say something else in relation to this, and it just slipped my mind. But if I think about it, I'll bring it up again.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Anybody? Do you want to comment, Dan?
I do. I have even though I have a Ukrainian name, I actually have Irish ancestors, and I got a mug for Christmas last year, and it said, "You know you're Irish if you have absolutely no idea how to make a long story short." But in any event, I'll try. But the fact of the matter is, they will be better off. And like Dennis pointed this out earlier, we send about $70 billion to Ottawa. They send back 27, 30 billion. So there's a $40 billion difference. 20 billion of that is what they call the cost of providing us with services. So and then 20 billion is the 20 billion that they've kept every year for the last 31 years, which is how we got to 630 billion that we think they owe us. But even if you take the $20 billion, so it's basically $10 billion in labor, where the labor is working in Ottawa and Hull, and $10 billion in actually costs like the price of the gas and the price of the building and the rent and one thing and another. But if you bring those jobs back to Alberta, then you have $10 billion of job creation with people, instead of working in Ottawa and Hull, they're working in Lethbridge and Red Deer and Medicine Hat and Lloydminster and Grand Prairie. And when the Tech Frontier mine had spent $1 billion getting regulatory approval, and I've just sort of lost track, but I think it was 1.5 billion over 10 years they were going to spend on the Tech Frontier mine, and they were talking about what a tremendous boost to the Alberta economy that would be. Well, if we brought all those jobs, like having our own pension, our own police and everything, if we brought the administration of that back to Alberta, it would be a $10 billion mega project every year. And as far as the police is concerned, the last time I looked, I'm sure it's gone up, but it was the cost of the RCMP in Alberta is about 400, maybe 450 billion. It was 400 billion the last time I was running, which was in 2015. Billion. Oh, no, 450 million. I'm sorry, 450 million. Yeah, you get talking about billions, first thing you know, we'll be talking about trillions here if we're not careful. But it was 400 million, but Alberta was already paying 259 million of it. Like the federal government was only paying, like, what is that, 30 or 40%. And so we'd be far better off to just have it all here and just, like, say, and at one point, Ed Stelmach signed a contract for another 10 years. But if you had to, you could just tell the RCMP, look, the contract is over, we're canceling it. Whatever you think the payout on it is, like, we'll take that off of the 650 billion we owed you. We're starting a new contract if you want. And the last time I talked to some of my RCMP friends, they said he thought 80% of the people would take a patch over to an Alberta provincial police force. Of course, we would guarantee them, as you pointed out, Vince, we would guarantee them everything that was in their contract, maybe plus a little bit more. Plus, they wouldn't have to worry about the government going broke and them not getting what was in their contract. And I think that's the answer you should have for your friends. Just say, look, it will be as much or more as anything you're getting, and you can take our word for it. And if you won't take my word for it, you can take Dennis's and Vince's.
All right, my mind twigged again, and I remembered what I was going to say. So remember the Trans Mountain Pipeline, it was owned by Enbridge, and they had a certain cost to finish it. That was etched in stone. When the federal government bought Trans Mountain, they finished it at 5 times the amount that Enbridge was going to spend to finish it. That speaks to inefficiency, something that everybody should know. When you purchase a product or a service from private enterprise and you spend $1 for it, when you purchase that same product or service from the federal government, it costs you $3. Okay? Trans Mountain was 5 times the amount. So process that, internalize it from the perspective of understanding how much better off we would be if we weren't giving all this money to Ottawa and having it churn through the bureaucracy, and then we get back a fraction of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted quickly, but something we got to watch ourselves with is bewaring the rabbit holes of what-isms, what-ifs, because we can spend 6 more hours and have 10 more pension plans proposed by people, but they're very important questions at the same time. A person's very concerned. If they're reliant on that pension, they want to know they can pay the bills. They're not going to vote on a variable. But I just want to mention, Todd had mentioned a white paper, for example, and I'd done a couple of events with Rebel, actually, and Ezra got up and he mentioned something really interesting. I'm going to follow up with him on that. Was the Bloc Québécois and the Parti Québécois actually contracted a bunch of academics, others, and built a 7-volume document of answering any question they could possibly imagine in depth on, so they could answer all those variables at meetings like this. So not just as we said, which we'd like you to take our word for it, but as you're saying, you want numbers, you want to say point at this so
Yes.
I can see. And that's a task we have to take on so that we can give quicker answers, or at least point people more quickly to something like that. I'm going to get Ezra to send that to me. It needs to be translated, and I'm sorry, my Yiddish is better than my French. But we'll get that. I mean, we don't have to have the same answers as Quebec, but they have a lot of the same common questions. If you're talking about a new nation, there's no sense reinventing a lot of those wheels, too. So there are questions that have to be answered, but it's going to take us a few more months to really get a good spot to hammer them out.
Okay, great. Thank you.
In regards to that point, if you need a translator, call me. I speak French too. I lived there in Quebec for 20 years. My question is not necessarily about Quebec specifically, it's about the support within the UCP caucus and within the UCP membership. Can you expand on the support that the independence movement has within the UCP?
All right, it's good to have some connections. Internal polling with respect to UC membership is that something in the order of 65 to 70% of UCP members are in support of Alberta sovereignty. So that's an important number. And now, granted, that is a poll. And I want to comment on polls just for a second, because as Cory pointed out, depending on the poll that is conducted, you might see that we have 1/3, maybe as high as 40%, maybe as high as 44%. It depends on where the poll was conducted. But there's another fact here, and that is we still live in an era of cancel culture. And when people are polled a question that might have implications for them if they answer honestly, for example, you saw what happened during the trucker convoy when people donated money to the trucker convoy. Many of them had their accounts frozen. So this issue of cancel culture is still quite important. So I'm not certain of what the accuracy of polling is right now, but I'm going to give you 2 proxies to think about. One was one that Cory already brought up, or somebody did, and that was the equalization referendum, when 62% of Albertans voted to end equalization. Could that be a proxy for how that same 62% would feel about a poll or a sovereignty question? I don't know the answer to that. But here's another proxy question. A few months back, polling indicated that there wasn't an appetite for an Alberta pension plan. Well, if you saw Rick Bell's report the other day, UCP polling revealed that the appetite for an Alberta pension plan is now 55%, which is interesting. So hundreds of town hall leaders and much discussion amongst people has moved that needle towards being favorably disposed to a pension plan. So take polling for what it is. It's an estimate, but in cancel culture time, is it that accurate? And I don't know the answer to the question. I'm just suggesting for all of you to think about the accuracy of polling.
Another question as well, the second question, in regards to the policy and compliance and governments. Right now, the UCP is currently starting their round questions for policy and governments that will be held at the AGM in November in Edmonton. And please, if you haven't gone to the AGM last year, please do so this year. Please, please, please. In regards to the policy and governments and compliance for the UCP, what I heard is that there's some constituency associations that are very reluctant to have any kind of propositions and or policies in regards to any kind of policy that lead or facilitate independence or for members. What is do you guys have a status on that, or what's the? Maybe Vince can answer that more effectively.
Yeah, I haven't mentioned it, but I was on the board of directors for the UCP provincially, and I'm now the CA president for Edmonton Southwest. And so your question, so there's a number of people here who petitioned, sort of stepped out of their lane, so to speak, by some people viewed it at the last AGM with regards to the Bill of Rights, and it rankled a few feathers, and I personally think that it was good what happened. It was a very healthy discussion, and it helped in the fact that people normally at a policy AGM, you have 3 people who come up and speak one way and 3 people who speak the other way, and then we vote and that's it. But because the Bill of Rights was such an issue, we had much more discussion on it, and that was very healthy. But in retrospect, I think that the better way to go when it comes to things like the Bill of Rights and this question within the UCP is to call a special general meeting. So it's a moment where the UCP can discuss the pros and cons and the benefits and the drawbacks of each of the possible avenues going forward, and it doesn't conflict with the regular AGM. I think we've called one special general meeting so far before, and it doesn't always have to be about punting a premier.
No.
This
is just policy-wise.
In fact, I think it would be very reassuring for our current premier, because within the UCP there is a strong independence sentiment, but there is also a very strong support for our premier and a respect for the fact that she feels obligated to sit this one out because of her role as a public servant, which literally means serving the public, not the UCP, but the entire public. So my personal view is the approach on this would be, rather than make it a policy and governance thing for the next AGM, call a special general meeting, which means me and 21 others petitioning the board for a special meeting. Personally, I'd love to see it in Lloydminster.
Awesome. Thanks.
I just want to, if I can, speak just a little bit about the money issue. So good questions by Barb. One of the things that we can tell people is that by law under the Canada Pension Act is that we can't have any less than what we're already getting, and we're not going to pay any more. So it's the same deal or better. And with respect to the RCMP and replacing them, at some point it looks like the feds may actually get out of provincial policing. If they don't, the Premier has already started to fill the many gaps, 20%. We're paying for 100%, but we're only getting 80% of the officers on the road. And so she's starting to give more powers to the sheriffs, increasing their units. So she's prepared. She also has the grant for communities to look at other options. So if the RCMP does leave, we'll probably buy all their cars and all their guns. And like somebody had mentioned, we'll patch over. I would like to thank Todd for bringing this really excellent panel. And I own full copyright on this, so don't use it or I'll sue you. But this is excellent. I look at you guys as the fathers of deconfederation, so trademark. But it just kind of piqued an interest and a question for any of the panel. Going forward, after the Citizens Initiative is done and the province or the Elections Alberta goes through the signatures to make sure they're all good, and then we get into the actual campaign, I would love to see, and I don't know if anyone's thought of it, have basically a summit of people like yourselves and maybe the other parties or whatever come together, because we need to win this sucker. And we need everybody, as I think all of you spoke, we're only together on one issue, and we may not like each other sometimes, but has anyone thought of that at all? Or
good question.
And Danny, you should probably weigh in on this question as well. But I think what you've said, Scott, is absolutely essential. Even though the various independence parties, the number of people who supported them was small, it's still a significant number of people, and there are people around those independence parties that are larger than the ones that actually voted. So I would very much like to see, because there are many other freedom movements, not just parties, but the freedom movements. And so messaging really is that you take all of the independence parties, all of the freedom movements, and have them funneled down to one question, one issue, and that is support for the referendum on Alberta sovereignty and the importance of registering their contact information, at least with us, so we have a good idea of where we're at. And although we've got around 250,000 people registered now, we're aiming for 800,000 to 1 million by the end of August or September. Danny, do you want to add to that, of getting everybody together here?
I do, because I think this truly is an all-hands-on-deck situation. And I was in Carstairs last, I guess it was last Saturday, wasn't it? We were in Carstairs, and somebody said, well, we should merge all the independence parties into one party. And I said, well, you know, Danielle Smith and Jim Prentice thought about that. They decided to merge the two parties into one party. I said, did that benefit anybody here in the room? Did it benefit anybody in this room, the fact that they decided to merge the two together? No. And then, you know, a few years later, we sort of survived that, and Brian Jean, you know, went to a big speech in Calgary and said, oh, I've asked Jason Kenney to put on his dancing shoes, and Jason Kenney said, I'll take you up on that. And with all due respect to the PC party, like they were dead and in their grave, all we had to do was go to their funeral and say a prayer and kick dirt in on top of them. We'd have never seen him again. But anyway, Jason Kenney breathed life back into him, and next thing you know, we had a united Conservative Party, and about a year after we'd all been united, Jason Kenney set about throwing all us Wild Roses out again. So, like, I'm really big on all working together, but I'm not big on like merging into one unit. But I think what will happen as this unfolds is, like, everybody can get out and campaign to win the referendum so we can get out of this country. And as the campaign unfolds, I think it'll become clear, like, once we win the referendum, who should lead going forward. And I've had more than, you know, one person say to me, well, what are you going to do if the Alberta Prosperity Project wants to start a political party? I said, well, I'm going to donate money to them and hope they win. You know what I mean? But in any event, like let's worry about winning the referendum first, and then we'll worry about who gets to the top of Mount Everest. But just before I sit down, I want to comment on your cancel culture, Dennis, because that is a really important thing that we all have to be aware of. Besides being involved in the Wild Rose Party, we have a little group called the Economic Education Association, and we've hosted Freedom Talk conferences since about 2014. And again, Kevin Avram helped us with that. But at one of our conferences, John Carpy was going to be one of the speakers, and he had just been in a kerfuffle where he was in trouble for having said something about the Gay Pride Parade. So it was a Sunday afternoon, our conference was starting on Friday. It was a Sunday afternoon. I got a call from CBC, and she said, well, I understand that John Carpy is going to be speaking at your conference. And I said, yes, he is. She said, well, are you aware of what he said about, you know, the gay pride flag or whatever? And I said, well, I'm aware of it. I don't actually know what I said. But she said, well, are you still going to let him speak? And I said, well, if I didn't invite anybody to speak that hadn't said something awkward in their life, I'd have no one to come to my meeting. So I said, of course we're going to have him come and speak. So anyway, she called back later, so anyway, she actually wrote a pretty good article in the Calgary paper. But anyway, the next morning, Danielle's producer, when she was the host on the radio show, the producer called and said, that some people had been complaining to them about, you know, what he had said and about the fact that John was going to be speaking at this conference. And she said, would you like to come on the talk show at 9:30? And I said, you know, I'm pretty good on the wheat board and carbon and one thing and another, but when it comes to gay pride flags, I'm sort of outside of my scope of understanding. And so I said, how about if we get my friend John Robson to come on with you? So anyway, John Robson came on and presented, our defense of why John Carpy was going to be speaking. And over the course of the 2-hour show, Danielle said, well, like, what do you think about John Carpy speaking at this conference? Do you think he should be excluded or not? And I just forget the numbers now, but I think she had like 264 people texted in and said no. Like, I think Danielle was speaking at that conference too, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, it was about 264 people texted no, he should be able to speak, and 2 people texted in and said no, he shouldn't be allowed to. Well, anyway, the next, like Monday or Tuesday, I get a call from the Port of Call where we're having the conference, and the general manager said, well, actually, we're pretty concerned. We've had, several complaints about some of your speakers, and we're just worried about there being an incident. So anyway, like I said, so yeah, I know what you're talking about, but I said, this is what happened. I said, Danielle had 264 people in favor of him and 2 people against. We still hired extra security because they were outside. We were lucky it was 40 some below, so we thought, thank you, God. Like, I mean, there are, So anyway, they were protesting outside. But again, coming back to the council culture, if they'd have said, well, no, we're not having you, or if we'd have said, oh, well, we won't have him, then it means that 2 people would have negated the vote of like 164 people who wanted to hear him. So anyway, this is another thing when we're talking about all the bullshit they're going to put towards us. A lot of it will be this cancel culture stuff where they're trying to, undermine any of us that are trying to move the project forward. So we're going to have to be really, really tough to do this, but I think we can do it.
I just wanted to say that the beauty of the citizen-initiated referendum is that it goes past all of the political party shenanigans. It's direct democracy, really, and it's yes or no. And we can have NDP that come and vote for separation. Right? That's a possibility. In fact, I think in one of the polls I saw it was around 8% of NDPers, which surprised me. But traditionally, that's what has been our big problem. So I really want to thank our Premier for making citizen-initiated referendums a real possibility. I think that's one of the best things that we've seen for democracy in a very long time. So,
folks, just in the interest of time, I just can't tell you how much I appreciate that everybody's stuck with us for the better part of a Saturday afternoon here. If it's all right, we're going to maybe have 1, 2 questions, 3 at the most, and we're going to wrap it up with final comments here, if that's okay. So, Dave, over to you folks.
Yes, gentlemen, thank you so much for the information, and certainly been a great panel to listen to. I have to tell you that I guess I'm a hardline independence person, like very hard. My history, I should give it to you. My name is Art Hanger. I was a reformer. Went down there with Preston Manning back in 1993. And in 2000, the reins were handed over to the Conservatives. Now, this was after years of Liberal government. And Hugh Siegel, who was a senator at the time, came up to me in an installation event where Burt Brown, the only elected senator we've ever had, was installed. And Hugh Siegel said to me, he's a longtime Tory hack, I guess, but he come up and he says, Art, he says, I wanted to shake your hand. He says, for all the work that you reformers did. And he says, I want to thank you. Now that you have given us the reins, we'll take it from here. And that's exactly what has happened in Ottawa since that time. It doesn't matter what party you put in there, it's the same. I don't care if it's conservative or if it's liberal. It's the same. It's just a matter of degree, unfortunately. Now, I guess I'm suspicious of so much, even on this legislation that's coming through. I don't know much about the Referendum Act. I don't even know what the regulations are going to be when they open or when they pass the act and they set the orders in council, which they can control totally through the government of the day. So I'm not sure how that's all going to play out for us, how much difficulty there will be in reaching those particular points. But I'm suspicious up until the very end that I see it. So I guess I'm going to be far short of passing on any accolades to the Premier at this point in time. Yes, you lowered the bar, but what else is going to be happening, I don't know. I'd like to see it all play out first. So I am told that there's a required number of 177,000 citizens to set the Citizens Initiative matter ahead to demand a referendum. How many signatures are required for the referendum itself for that to pass? And I ask that question because I don't think the Clarity Act is clear on that point. So what would that number be?
You bring up a really excellent question, because as you know, Art, and you know, I've had many conversations, but fundamentally the Clarity Act does say that it has to be a clear question, and I've read you the question, and it couldn't be any clearer in my mind. And it has to be a clear outcome. Now, this conflicts with international law in a way in which, if, for example, international law is 50% plus one, and it's up to the House of Commons to determine whether or not there's a clear mandate from the people that might be 55%, 60%, or 65%. That is an issue. That's a serious issue. And all I can say to you is that what we are expecting and what we are hoping is that with a successful referendum, and if it's 50% plus one or greater, that the first thing that will happen is the next day the U.S. government acknowledges that Alberta is a sovereign nation as a result of that referendum. And the second thing that I want to see happen, that we're hoping will happen, is that the Premier, in her own words, has said, I will respect the result of the referendum, meaning that that should be 50% plus one, which, although it may fly in the face of the Clarity Act, the reality is 50% plus one represents the expressed democratic will of the majority of the people that voted on that referendum. So now, there's what we expect is that there's now about 2.8, and it could be up to 3 million eligible voters. Last we checked, it was 2.8 million eligible voters. That being the case, what we're looking at in terms of a plurality for a successful referendum, we're looking at least 1.5, and we'd like to see it closer to 1.7 million people that vote in favor of the referendum, which is why, in my mind, we want to wait before we submit the petition question. Because imagine 177,000, rather, we're at 250,000 people that have registered. Around that 250,000 people is a larger number that will support the referendum. But if we're at 1 million people by the end of September, for example, that have registered their intent to support a referendum on independence, around that 1 million people is a much bigger group that gets us closer to the point of success. I'm not sure that satisfactorily or fully answered your question, but I think that might be the best I can do at this particular time.
Well, I guess it's going to be an unknown then as to where that threshold will actually be, whether it's 50% plus one. But I understand your point that it will be pressed by those that are pushing this issue, which is the citizens of the province. 50% plus one is sufficient.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting to see what's happening in some of the constituency associations in Quebec, where it's boiled down to one vote difference. One vote difference. And yet, one vote difference is in that particular riding might be 0.0001% of the people that voted. You know, that's democracy. That's a plurality. That's a winning number. It should be 50% plus one, period.
Now, just another question here on the ballot. My understanding that there's going to be more than one referendum question. And that troubles me because if you have a clear answer or we have a clear answer, then another question could be, well, maybe about a pension or maybe about some other issue that makes it look like we're still in Canada and this is what the question is asking. You know.
Yeah. This is a really, really important point, and what the importance of this can't be understated. Imagine you're going to the polls, okay, and you're looking at a ballot, and it's got. Do you agree that the province of Alberta shall become a sovereign country and cease to be a province within Canada or of Canada? But then you have, under that, you've got other choices. Do you agree with an Alberta pension plan? Do you agree with taking control of immigration? Do you agree with this, that, and the other thing? Just like you said, it muddies the water. So Vince, you don't know this, but what's coming is what we've just drafted. And it should occur at a special general meeting of the UCP. These are two resolutions that we're going to submit. The first one is that, do you agree that this is the question that should go forward in the referendum? And we provide the evidence for that and the benefit to the government and to Alberta. The second question is, do you agree that there should be a single ballot question on Alberta sovereignty? That's the other resolution that we're planning. We've already drafted it. I've sent it to Mitch, and I've also sent it to Daryl Comic. So you'll get it as well. And it's and I've spoken to Ray Strom about it as well. And for those of you who don't know, Ray is on the board of directors of the UCP, and he's in charge of policy and governance. Does that answer your question, Art?
Yes, I see things are in motion then. The other point, I guess, just a comment. When you had the referendum or the meeting in Calgary, you had something like 1,200 people show up. I did notice there that there were a number of young guys, say around 25 to 35, that had a lot of questions to ask. But I haven't seen this in any other meetings where you have the next generation, people just into the workforce, and they're looking to find themselves a home or a future, and they're not finding it, but they're showing up and they're hearing some of this stuff. So that, to me, is going to be what tips the scales. If we can't attract them, then we're not going to tip the scales on this referendum.
You're right with that, and I just have two comments about that, Art. In the U.S., winning the last election, the youth vote did come out, and they came out because they wanted a future, and they recognized, with respect to taxation and regulation, there was a better option for them. In Alberta, we're seeing the same thing, and what you pointed out is true. There were a number of young people at that event in Calgary. We had the same sort of outcome that took place in Ponoka the other day. There were a number of young people there as well, and it was a sellout. we're starting to resonate, I think, with a lot more young people who realize that they're never going to be able to afford a house. They may not be able to afford, purchasing a car outright, and they may be, destined to be able to only rent. They may not be able to sufficiently plan for their future, and they're starting to recognize that, which I think is the reason why we're seeing, part of the reason why we're seeing a swing in support of the Alberta sovereignty movement. But it's an excellent question, and thank you for asking them.
Well, folks, I've just got to say this again. Thank you so much for coming out today. Dennis, Cory, Michael, Vince, Danny, it truly has been my honor to share the stage with you today. I hope that this has been helpful. I hope this has been thought-provoking. I'm going to leave this with you. My parting comments: a glorious future awaits. This is nothing to be afraid of, to be concerned about. This is putting the foundation in place for prosperity for generations to come. I would answer Barb's question, and I would have added this. When it comes down to it, if we do this and we put the foundation in place in our society, we will unlock trillions of dollars of investment in our society and everything that goes along with it. Thanks for coming, folks.